Councilmember Dinowitz and Councilmember Mealy. So we will begin, and we will allow Speaker Adrian Adams to open up with opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to our Housing and Buildings Chair, Pierina Sanchez, who is on Zoom this morning, and of course, our Land Use Chair, Rafael Salamanca, for chairing today's critical hearing on fair housing and affordable housing development. This oversight hearing could not have come at a more critical time. Our city is facing a dire housing crisis that has exacerbated homelessness and made our city less affordable in every neighborhood. More than half of all New Yorkers are rent burdened, paying more than 30% of their monthly income on rent alone. The numbers that explain our housing shortage could not be clearer. Over the last decade, only 200,000 new housing units were built, while our city gained 630,000 new residents and nearly 1 million jobs. Our rate of housing production has quite simply not kept pace with our population and job growth. All of us have felt the pinch of this housing shortage, which has worsened over time and has fueled a crisis of affordability. It has disproportionately burdened those who need affordable housing at the deepest levels. According to the latest New York City Housing and Vacancy Survey in 2021, the vacancy rate for rental apartments below $1,500 per month was the city's starkest at less than 1%. This affordability and housing crisis has triggered a significant decline in our city's Black population of 10% over the past 2 decades and contributes to the housing instability across all of our communities. It's clear that the current system of advancing housing production is not meeting the scale of New Yorkers' needs. With so many people struggling to make ends meet, we need comprehensive solutions that match the needs in our city. There are many efforts we must undertake to address these challenges, including those contributed by our partners in the state and federal governments. As a city, there is now a focus on exploring how zoning changes can help unlock necessary housing production, which the mayor and city planning have initiated with a preliminary proposal for a citywide text amendment. It is also critical that solutions recognize that housing production, particularly of affordable units, has not occurred equitably across the city. Too many neighborhoods have been able to opt out of contributing to the production of affordable housing needed in our city, while others have been pitching in and deserve greater investments. These inequities are what Introduction 1031, my Fair Housing Framework bill, are aimed at addressing. Every neighborhood across our city must contribute to solving our housing crisis. This legislation would create 5-year housing production targets for every community district in the city, including for low-income affordable housing, supportive housing, and senior housing, as well as the preservation of low-income affordable units based on factors such as access to opportunity, displacement risk, infrastructure capacity, and vulnerability to climate change. It would also require the development of specific equity goals and strategies that increase the production and preservation of low-income affordable housing and voucher utilization in high-opportunity community districts, expand preservation and anti-displacement resources in districts with the highest displacement risks, and deepen neighborhood investments in underserved communities that have contributed significant housing development. It is vital that we create a framework for meeting our city's housing needs while working to ensure that this growth is equitable, sustainable, and supported by investments into communities that have historically been under-resourced. We know that every neighborhood is different, and housing needs vary across income, age, and other demographics. But many neighborhoods with abundant access to infrastructure and amenities like open space, thriving schools, and public transit have produced far too few housing units. It's important that every neighborhood does its fair share, including these and excluding none. To successfully address this housing and affordability crisis, we know that our city must boost housing production. It must be done in an equitable way that advances fair housing goals and builds stronger and healthier neighborhoods for all New Yorkers. Our efforts to boost housing production must also ensure that approved projects are advanced in a timely fashion, which too often has not occurred. This is the focus of Chair Salamanca's important legislation, Introduction 362, which will also be the subject of today's hearing. The city's success towards increasing housing production requires that our relevant city agencies are adequately staffed and supported, so the dedicated public servants responsible can advance our housing goals. I look forward to hearing from our city's agencies, advocates, and the public about these policies of legislation and critical issues so we can solve our city's housing crisis. I want to thank the Council's legislative and land use staff for their hard work on this hearing and the bills being heard today. Now I will turn it back over to Chair Salamanca and Chair Sanchez.
Thank you, Speaker Adams. I want to recognize that we've been also joined by Chair Farah Lewis. Now we will hand it over to Chair Berina Sanchez for opening remarks.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, Speaker. Good morning. I am Councilmember Pierina Sanchez, Chair of the Committee on Housing and Buildings. Please excuse my virtual presence today as I am home with COVID, but I could not miss this most important discussion. Thank you, Speaker, for your leadership on this matter. Before I commence my remarks, I would like to ask for a brief moment of silence, remembering Nicolas Feliz Dominici, a 1-year-old baby who we lost in our community following exposure to opioids at a daycare center in Kingsbridge, as well as 3 other children who are still recovering from this exposure. Thank you. Their exposure highlights so many of the overlapping challenges that our communities face, from the ruthlessness of an illegal drug trade to lacking affordable childcare opportunities. And once you know more and learn more about the beautiful family of Nicolas Dominici, you also understand that it's also related to affordable housing opportunities. Nicolas, for you, we fight on. So thank you, Speaker. Turning to our hearing today, New York City and municipalities across the country are facing a dire housing crisis. Not one that is felt equally by all New Yorkers or all those who call our country home, but one with pain concentrated in working class communities, communities of color, and one that is most felt by underrepresented people, like persons living with disabilities, sexual and gender minorities, religious minorities. That this pain is felt differentially is widely documented. It is a function of the history of our great nation. Government and private sector policies like redlining that devalued certain communities because they housed people of color. Investments from the federal government like the GI Bill and favorable mortgages that transferred no less than $100 billion in 1950 dollars or $1 trillion in 2023 dollars to white families in the post-war period at the exclusion of minority communities, and set the stage for white families to have an average net worth of $188,000 per family and Black families to have a median net worth of $24,100 today, an 8-fold difference. This unequal access to financing and practices like real estate steering, they go on in different forms to this day. They all serve to keep Black and brown New Yorkers in some neighborhoods and white New Yorkers in others. Is an acknowledgement to the physical and spatial manifestation of our country's deep inequality. The Fair Housing Act of 1968, revisited by HUD in the Obama and Biden administrations, have sought to address the legacy through strategic city and region-wide planning. I'm so proud that our city has led its very own fair housing planning process called Where We Live, released in 2020, which also intends to address our city's affirmatively furthering fair housing obligations. Yet our intentionality must remain. As of February of this year, only 17 of 81 commitments in the Where We Live plan were completed. And in addition to being behind on these commitments, our city, as our speaker has said, is neither building enough new housing to keep up with demand, nor building enough deeply affordable housing for those who need it the most. As we seek to change these realities, we must keep our collective feet on the gas to drive equity in our housing policies. Importantly, just last week, Mayor Adams unveiled a series of policies meant to breathe energy into our housing production in New York City. density bonuses for permanent affordability, promoting more mixed-use communities, transit-oriented development, office conversions, and the list goes on. I, for one, am excited to delve into these tough discussions as a council with my colleagues. And yet, at the heart of those discussions must be careful consideration of how different policy levers will help us to meet our housing goals, affirmatively furthering fair housing, producing more housing for the lowest income New Yorkers, and frankly, some of the hardest working and most vulnerable in our city. Housing for families like that of Nicolas Feliz Dominici, who lived with his 4 siblings and parents in an unaffordable 1-bedroom apartment because of the housing crisis in New York City. Let's talk about this like it is. A once in a lifetime opportunity where political will might just exist to make profound changes in the way that we produce housing. We must approach this opportunity carefully, thoughtfully, and attentive to all of our goals in housing production and how our levers help us to meet them. To that end, thank you again to Speaker Adams for introducing and fighting for this bill, which would create a citywide fair housing framework, a plan for housing growth guided by equity to ensure all communities fairly contribute to addressing the city's housing crisis and build housing that is accessible to all. In addition to Intro 1031, we will also hear Intro 362, sponsored by Councilmember Salamanca in relation to reporting requirements for HPDs related to affordable housing development. I would like to thank my staff, Sam Cardenas, Kaneem Robinson, and all of my district team, as well as the Housing and Buildings Committee staff, Taylor Zaloni, Claire McLachlan, Jose Conde, Andrew Bourne, Dan Krupp, and Brooke Fry. Now I'll pass it back to Councilmember Salamanca to say his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Sanchez. We'd like to recognize that we've also been joined virtually by Council Members Barron, Caban, and Moya. With that, I want to thank you, Speaker Adams and Chair Sanchez, for those introductions to today's joint hearing and the legislative proposals. I am Councilmember Rafael Salamanca, Chair of the Committee on Land Use, representing District 17 in the South Bronx, including the neighborhoods of Hunts Point, Melrose, Morrisania, Longwood, Crotona Park, and Soundview. Today's joint hearing between Housing and Buildings and Land Use reflects the overall goals of our proposed legislation to better coordinate the construction of housing with citywide strategic planning to ensure our growth is equitable, sustainable, and supported by infrastructure and services for all New Yorkers to thrive. My district has built more of new affordable housing than any other district in the city, with over 9,000 units completed or currently under development since 2014. We're doing our part to meet the city's housing goals, transforming vacant and underutilized land into affordable homes all across my district. But the South Bronx alone cannot solve the city's housing crisis. We need a citywide framework where every neighborhood contributes a fair share. We cannot continue a status quo where one council district is building more affordable housing than 26 districts combined. We must also do more to prioritize investments in the infrastructure of opportunity: education, workforce development, economic development, transit, public health, and open space, alongside affordable housing, especially when we build in historically underserved neighborhoods. We cannot continue a status quo where racial disparities in economic and social well-being are growing rather than shrinking, where median annual household remains less than $40,000 in some neighborhoods compared to nearly $150,000 in other neighborhoods just a short distance away. Intro 1031 proposes a framework to integrate our citywide planning for housing and equity under a 5-year planning cycle for fair housing. This fair housing framework will ensure that policies to increase housing production, such as the administration's newly announced City of Yes for Housing Opportunity initiatives, are done in coordination with a citywide strategic plan that prioritizes racial equity and a holistic approach to development. Yes, we have to build more, but we have to think through where and how we build so that affordable housing is created throughout the whole city and the needed infrastructure upgrades are also made. This legislation builds on the progress of Local Law 78 of 2021, which I co-sponsored along with the public advocate, creating the Equitable Development Data Explorer and a requirement for land use application to submit a racial equity report on housing and opportunity. But we will not be successful in addressing the housing and equity crisis unless New York City has a housing department that is well-resourced, efficient, transparent in its development process. Under current practices, it can regularly take HPD more than 5 years to move through the process of planning, land use review, financing, construction, and administrating the housing lottery. In my district, there are projects that we approved through ULURP 5 to 7 years ago that have still not closed financing and broken ground. HPD's open data does not currently include any reference to a project's ULURP approvals, request for proposal process, if publicly owned land, or closing date, making it difficult to monitor and hold HPD and developers accountable. Intro 362 will close these gaps in open data and increase transparency and accountability for HPD development. However, I continue to be very concerned about the administration's proposed agency's budget cuts and hiring freezes. If applied to HPD's planning, marketing, and development units, which are already understaffed with high vacancy rates, these cuts will slow down the development process even more and lead to even less affordable housing. I would like to thank my staff, Land Use Committee staff, Paris Slaughter, Brian Paul, William Vidal, and Housing and Buildings Committee staff for their work in preparing for this important and timely hearing. And I will now turn it over to the council to swear in the panel.
Thank you. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions? Thank you.
Floor is yours, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman Salamanca, Speaker, Chair Sanchez. Let me, before I offer my prepared opening statement, let me thank you for your leadership, for your commitment to this cause, and for your compelling statements about the incredible need that we're facing in this city. We are partners, and we look forward to working together with you and your teams to address this crisis. Good morning, and not only to Speaker Adams, Chair Sanchez, and Chair Salamanca, also to all the members of the Housing and Buildings and Land Use Committees, as well as the other members who are not members of this committee but who have joined today. I, having served in this body, know that you often show up at a hearing because you also want your voice to be heard in that committee and in that conversation, so thank you for being here. I'm Adolfo Carrion, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. I'm joined by my colleagues, Ahmed Tigani, First Deputy Commissioner and Chief Diversity Officer of our agency, Kim Darga, Deputy Commissioner for Development, and Lucy Jaffe, Associate Commissioner for Housing Policy, as well as our colleague from the Department of City Planning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to discuss HPD's fair housing work as well as the legislation being heard today. The city is committed to building and preserving low-cost and affordable rental housing in every neighborhood to help address our long-standing housing shortage and to affirmatively further fair housing. In October 2020, we released Where We Live NYC, the city's comprehensive fair housing plan. Where We Live was based on 6 years of work, including community engagement, data analysis, policy analysis, and goal setting. Our charge in that process was to identify, quote, meaningful actions to overcome patterns of segregation and foster communities free from barriers that restrict access to opportunity based on protected characteristics, close quote. During the community engagement phase of developing Where We Live, the agency held more than 62 community conversations across the 5 boroughs in 15 languages. In addition to these conversations, we established new avenues of communication with the public through a set of interactive online tools that enabled us to hear from people who traditionally have been left out of the conversation. We spoke to more than 700 New Yorkers and 150 organizations in formulating this plan. The essence of fair housing is having meaningful choice. New Yorkers, every New Yorker should have access to housing in the neighborhood that best fits their needs. And yet, it was very clear through our Where We Live NYC analysis that too many New Yorkers face a wide range of obstacles to fair housing. And as we discussed in the plan in detail, our city is still very segregated, especially by race. Consequently, we committed to a multi-pronged approach to achieve our fair housing goals, as expressed in the 6 goals, 25 strategies, and 81 commitments laid out in the plan. Most relevant to today's hearing and the proposed legislation is the goal to, quote, facilitate equitable housing development in New York City and the region, close quote. We need to build more housing citywide to alleviate our extreme housing shortage. The mayor and this administration have set a moonshot goal of facilitating the development of 500,000 new homes over the next 10 years to address this crisis. To achieve our fair housing goals, where we build and the types of housing we build matters. New York is a diverse city, and with that diversity comes a wide range of housing needs and wants. Some New Yorkers value living near their preferred school or accessible public transportation. Some want to be near their jobs and doctors, churches, synagogues, mosques, parks, and other public spaces, near family and friends. To ensure that all New Yorkers can choose the housing and the neighborhood that best fits their needs, there must be housing of all types in every single neighborhood. Unfortunately, new housing development has been, at best, inconsistent across the city. In Where We Live, we made 20 commitments toward achieving equitable housing development in the city and the region. 19 of these 20 commitments are in progress or are already complete. Specifically, we have begun to focus on the parts of the city that lack low-cost housing and as such are not accessible to low-income New Yorkers in order to understand the specific obstacles that stand in the way. These limited affordability areas are the neighborhoods that have the least amount of low-cost housing, which we define as housing that would be affordable to households earning less than 60% of area median income. We can begin to address the lack of low-cost housing by building new, affordable housing in these limited affordability areas. So toward this end, the city rezoned Gowanus and Soho NoHo, which will bring up to 3,900 new permanently affordable homes to these neighborhoods. We also added points in the qualified allocation plan for proposals in limited affordability areas. This is the process by which the city sets out criteria and prioritizes for the allocation of federal low-income housing tax credits. We also added limited affordability areas to the mayor's management report so that New Yorkers can track our progress in financing affordable housing in these neighborhoods. To tackle many of the obstacles to equitable housing development and to achieve our fair housing goals, we need local and state partners. We have been fighting for an as-of-right new construction tax incentive with deeper affordability because it is one of our primary tools for developing affordable housing in the city's high-cost neighborhoods. We have been advocating for changes at the state level to create a path to legalize existing basements and create new accessory dwelling units. The Department of City Planning is leading collaborative work on the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity text amendments to simplify and modernize the zoning resolution to facilitate equitable housing development citywide. We also need legislative and regulatory action at the local and state level and the support of elected leaders and their constituents for neighborhood-wide and project-specific land use actions. The success of Where We Live was driven by the participation of a wide range of New Yorkers, advocates, and elected officials. We're committed, over and above our legal requirement, to complete the next iteration of Where We Live NYC. We released this plan in October 2020, and equitable housing development will remain at the forefront of our strategy. We will continue to do the community engagement, the data analysis, the policy analysis, and policy development required to meaningfully assess the progress we've made and advance our fair housing goals even further. We look forward to working closely with the Council, our partners at the state level, and members of the public to ensure that we bring the same level of data-driven decision-making, community engagement, and accountability to our next round of commitments. At this time, I'd like to turn to the legislation which is the subject of today's hearing. On Intro 362, we agree that the transparency into HPD's programs and processes is important, and we look forward to working with the Council to ensure that New Yorkers understand the process for financing affordable housing. While the bill contains some reporting requirements that HPD cannot fulfill based on our current systems and the availability of information that can only be obtained at certain times during the development cycle, we already report a good portion of this data and look forward to working with you to make sure this information is current and is as accessible as possible at any given moment. We support the goals of Intro 1031. We welcome accountability and partnership with the Council to achieve our fair housing goals. We look forward to working with you to address these critical issues. We're grateful for the productive work we have been able to accomplish with this committee and the Council, especially as we together address the critical housing needs of New Yorkers. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your opening remarks.
Thank you.
And it's good to see a Bronx kid here with us today. Yes, there we go. I want to recognize that we've been joined by Council Members Abreu, Hanks, and Shaker, and I will hand it off to Speaker Adrian Adams for the first round of questions.
Thank you so much, Chair Salamanca, and Commissioner, welcome once again, and the entire team, welcome today.
Speaker.
I'm going to focus on my bill, 1031, which I'm really happy with, and I want to find out what your thoughts are collectively on this legislation. Intro 1031 seeks to help increase overall housing production by setting targets based on our city's actual needs and capacity, while integrating this planning within an affirmatively furthering fair housing framework to address racial equity and disparities in housing production and neighborhood investment, which you referenced in your remarks, Commissioner. Does the administration foresee difficulties in the implementation of this bill?
Let me begin by saying thank you for shining a light on this important issue. If I may reflect for just a moment, I recall when I was in the Obama administration where President Obama advanced affirmatively furthering fair housing, and many of us around the country celebrated that because we knew that we needed to address historic discrimination and injustices that had marginalized large sectors of our population. We as a city embraced the rules that came out of that, the charge to municipalities around the country to set up a regime around that and set goals and aspirations for our cities, all toward the end of social justice. When another president came in 2016, that was taken down. New York City continued working on Where We Live NYC, continued working on affirmatively furthering fair housing. For us, Speaker, this is our North Star. All the work that we do is pointed toward addressing the inequities and furthering fair housing, creating opportunity for all incomes in all areas of the city. And now we have an opportunity with this bill, which we look forward to working on with you and the Council, to advance that work. There are naturally challenges in every bill because of the work that we do and the capacity that we have. We do have a regime of reporting already. It's in the MMR, so every year we come back and report the advances we're making. So our commitment is there. We look forward to our partnership in this process.
Thank you, Commissioner. The bill, Intro 1031, begins by requiring a citywide housing needs assessment. And it's a study of the total number and type of housing units that need to be produced or preserved to meet our city's long-term needs. This type of study is a standard best practice of long-term planning for housing growth. And you mentioned the number 500,000 as being your moonshot goal. Yes. In developing new homes over the next 10 years to address the crisis. With relation to that 500,000 number, we know it's the long-term goal, but is that based on any actual study to date?
Lucy Jaffe will address that.
So thank you for that question. A lot of our work internally, both through Where We Live, when we talk about the moonshot goal, is the result of interagency collaboration and as much planning as we can. Some of this long-term planning is always subject to unexpected circumstances and changes in what's going on in the city. And I certainly can defer to our colleagues at DCP to add more on how we think about the total citywide need. But these kinds of activities that you're talking about, the planning activities in the bill, are exactly the kind of fair housing related work that we have started to engage in because of Where We Live, and that we want to be working on with the council and working in partnership to make sure that we actually can, as many of us have talked about today in our testimony, in many of your introductory comments, making sure that we're building in housing of all types in all neighborhoods across the city.
Along those lines, is there an understanding of what types of units or income levels, size are needed?
So one of the various sources of data that we look at and that we were here just a few months ago talking about is the New York City Housing and Vacancy Survey. One of the major takeaways, which I believe, Speaker, you cited in your introductory remarks, is the incredibly low vacancy rate below for units that are renting below $1,500 a month. That's below 1%, and that is incredibly concerning. So you have heard us talk about, and we'll continue to talk about the fact that while we need more housing of all types citywide, we especially need low-cost and affordable rental units in many neighborhoods across the city, in all neighborhoods across the city.
And the outcome of that analysis has been, the analysis of the need has been that of the units that we subsidize as an agency, 95 to 96% of those units go to low-income families. And it includes extremely low-income, very low-income, low-income families. And you address the issue of rent burden. The lion's share, almost 2/3, are for families that are below 30% of AMI up to 50% of AMI, just about 60 some odd percent. So the analysis has led to policy and practice that is focused on the need.
Okay. And you know, and again, we know that we are so far behind in our production, in our development. Has DCP taken a look at how other cities perform their needs assessment?
Thank you, Speaker. Yes, one of the benefits, if you can call it that, of New York City being a little bit farther behind some other parts of the country with respect to, some of the zoning changes that we're proposing, is that we can look to other parts of the country to see what the likely outcomes are of certain types of reforms or changes. Or to see what the effects of certain actions are. So we certainly look to other parts of the country when we're looking at that. With respect to the 500,000 number, it's a dynamic system, of course, and coming up with a needs assessment into the future embeds a number of assumptions. But based on our analysis of things like historic production trends, vacancy rates, and other factors, we think that 500,000 over the next 10 years is what we would need in order to make the housing market palpably more tenant-friendly than it is today. So back to the commissioners and Lucy's point about housing choice. If we're producing more housing, that 500,000 moonshot, if we're creating real housing choice for tenants, then we believe we're moving towards the housing market that we want to see in the city.
Well, I mean, I'm just being nosy. I'm just being nosy. We know that we're not up to par with our development. Who else out there, across the globe, who else is, in the same situation as New York?
Well, we know.
You can rat them out.
I'm sure that I'm sure that city planning, in their study of cities and the needs of our city, does this kind of analysis. But I think we anecdotally know that there's a housing crisis in the major American cities. If you look at Los Angeles, with people sleeping in the street near the beaches. I recently visited San Francisco, and I was shocked that in the downtown there are encampments on the street. There are people in that city that are working and homeless. Sadly, we have some of that as well, but not as severe. I know that my colleagues and friends from the administration back in the city of Chicago are facing the same kinds of challenges. Yeah. So this is a national issue that requires a national response, and that's why it's so important for all of us to sing from the same song sheet when it comes to the federal solutions that we're asking for. And we can go into this a little later. Kim is an expert on this and can walk us through it, but we're asking for certain tools from the federal government. In addition to, hey, keep the Section 8 vouchers coming. If we do have an emergency, thank you very much for the emergency housing vouchers we got. We have another emergency. We have a migrant crisis. We have other issues to address right now. But in terms of the tax credits and the capital that we can apply to invest in producing housing, probably one of the biggest solutions is to reduce this 50% test that we have on the tax credit application to these projects to 25%. We would essentially put our production on steroids. We'd almost double our production. Obviously, we face the challenges of, do we have the staffing? Do we have the resources at the local level to manage the flow? Yes, I would imagine that's your follow-up. But what a good problem to have, right? To have more resources than what we need. Right now, and I'm sure we're going to go into the pipeline issues later, but we've got hundreds of projects in the queue waiting to close. And if we had more resources, we can get them through and across the finish line.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
It is. It's a huge deal.
That's a big deal. Go ahead.
And if I may add to the commissioner's comments, he is absolutely correct that this is a challenge that cities, even smaller cities and small towns, talk about their housing challenges. Those housing challenges look different outside of New York City, in different cities, in different states, and internationally as well. We have seen some cities and states start to take some of the actions that we've talked about here in front of this council recently that are part of the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, steps to make it easier to build accessory dwelling units, steps to make it easier to add more housing in neighborhoods or cities where we're not getting as much housing development. So we are starting to see that in other parts of the country and are hoping to work with the council and our partners at the state level as well to make sure that we can do that here.
And let me just add that the zoning text amendment, the citywide zoning text change, would unleash private investment. We have the largest, most productive public-private partnership to produce affordable housing bar none, anywhere in the country and possibly the world. And part of that is the tax incentives, where we incentivize. We say, private investor, come into a deal with us. We will reduce the price point of X% of those units so they can go to affordable housing. And the tool that we have is to obviously reduce your tax burden so you can deliver affordable housing, especially in high-cost areas. If we could unleash that in tandem with more places around the city where those opportunities become available, you think about the opportunity. Most of the new construction work that happens in New York City for affordable housing comes from private applications or private partners coming to the city and saying, hey, commish, hey, mayor, hey, speaker, I have a piece of property and I'd like to use one of your programs to deliver affordable housing. Or, hey, I have a piece of property, you have a tax incentive, I'm willing to make the investment. It's going to give you the price point you need to produce affordable housing. And of course, they're in business, they'll make a return on their dollar. So it's a sound public-private partnership. We need to encourage it. So we're anxious to go back to Albany and continue to make this argument, hopefully with partners from here.
Good. I'm just going to ask one more question for this round. I'll turn it back over to the chair. You spoke about other cities in California and people working and homeless, and we do have that here. But we also know that there have been many jobs created here over the past year or so. Of the 1 million jobs created over the past decade, do we know the percentage or what percentage is living outside of the city in surrounding region, and to what extent has the housing supply grown in northern New Jersey, Long Island, parts of Westchester County?
Before city planning chimes in, I'll take the privilege of an open hot mic to say that both the mayor, in setting the moonshot goal, in tandem with our governor setting another moonshot goal for the state of 800,000 units. And think about it, we have the lion's share of that 800,000 that she envisioned across the state, taking advantage of smaller municipalities and transit systems that spread across the veins of that system spread across regions of the state to exploit that opportunity to deliver affordable housing for working families. She made the argument, just as the mayor did, just as you did in your prepared remarks, that it puts us in an uncompetitive position, in a disadvantage. New York City is the global city, the city of everything, the leader. And we are now in a position where we can't keep our workforce here. So what happens? DCP.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Right on cue.
Right on cue, yeah.
Sets the table well. In terms of general trends, we've seen the share of commuters coming from New Jersey increase. The share of commuters coming from Long Island, Westchester, rest of Hudson Valley decrease. And that's for the simple reason that New Jersey is building a lot more housing than New York City's suburbs. White Plains, Yonkers, New Rochelle, they're building a little bit of housing, so I don't want to completely, drag the suburbs. But the New York City suburbs are lagging far behind the New Jersey suburbs. That's shifting commuting patterns toward New Jersey. And beyond that, likely represents constraints on the ability of our regional economy to grow. If you don't have housing for the workers, then great research from other parts of the country shows that presents real constraints for the ability of a regional economy to grow, to create jobs. So it ends up hurting us all.
For sure. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would like to recognize that we've been joined by Council Members Rivera, Brewer, and Borelli. I have a few questions before I hand it over to Chair Sanchez. I want to start with the AMI structure. Who sets the formula for the AMIs, the area median incomes?
So it is set by the federal government, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and I'd like Kim to talk just a little bit about that process and how it plays out on the ground here, very quickly. Thank you, Chairman.
So I'll defer to Lucy if there's more technical questions about the formula, but we take the national formula and certainly look at data in New York City, which determines how AMI is set annually. And within our individual programs, we then figure out how to create opportunities for different households with various income so that we are able to serve a range of New Yorkers.
Okay. And the AMI, it changes annually, correct?
Yes.
And it's the federal government who puts the formula together, HUD.
Yes.
Am I correct? Okay. And that formula, are they using the average incomes of New Yorkers, of just New York City, or are they using the average incomes of New York City and the surrounding counties?
Lucy can talk to the formula a bit. Yeah.
So this is a source of major confusion, in part because of the fact that we all use this term area median income. Some of the more technical folks call it HUD income limits because of this confusion. It does in fact include incomes from surrounding areas, but actually it's not incomes that are driving the major increases or sort of the ways that people might feel disconnected from AMI here in the city. In New York City and some of the more expensive housing markets across the country, HUD has a complicated formula where they're actually factoring in rents. So when our rents increase significantly, it is driving up our area median income calculation as well for New York City. We find that to be the bigger factor than the geographic catchment area, if you will.
Okay. Is it safe to say that in a council, and I'm going to use my district as an example, there are projects that I approved and rezoned in Council District 17 in 2017, 2018, that have not closed yet through HPD. But we agreed when we negotiated those projects here in the council and we voted, we agreed that we agreed on the AMIs at the time in 2017 and 2018. Is it fair to say that when HPD decides to close in 2023 or 2024, you're going to utilize the AMIs of the current year, 2023 and 2024, opposed to what we originally agreed to in 2017 or 2018?
Chairman, that's a great question, which we deal with all the time. There is a flow of traffic coming into the agency of deals that have the same question and pose a challenge and an opportunity for us to adjust AMIs as needed by virtue of the changing costs in the market. So at the end of the day, we need to make sure that these deals pencil out so that the price point of the rents make sense, so that we're addressing the local market conditions in, for instance, your district in the South Bronx, that we don't topple over the developer financially or the general contractor. Everything has to make sense. And so there is a process for adjusting the AMIs. This is a pass to Kim. She
So
deals with
I need an answer though.
Yes.
Do you use, what year do you use the AMIs? Do you use
year
the
that
one that we agreed to, or do you use the one that's in the current year?
So the AMIs that we agree to are the percentage. So you might have a transaction that is, let's say, an Ella project, right? Extremely low income project under our financing programs where we're setting rents at 30% AMI, 40% AMI, 50, 60 generally. And if we've structured that agreement back in 2017, we are still committed to maintaining the mix, but the rents absolutely are going to be higher. And the reality is that operating costs are higher too. And so, as the commissioner noted, we have to be able, at the end of the day, to make sure that income can cover the expenses of the project. And I know in some of the past council hearings we've had over the last year, we've talked a lot about the challenges of actually projects just operating right now. And in the last 2 years alone, operating expenses and the projects that we finance have gone up more than 20%. And so we are with you and absolutely committed to creating deep affordability that helps serve the needs of New Yorkers across the city. At the same time, we need to make sure that at the end of the day, the project can cover the expenses so that the housing quality remains over a long period of time.
Yeah. Let me explain my frustration. I approve a project in 2018. I go to the local community board. I say, hey, this is mixed income. I got my 15% homeless set aside, and I got 30%, 40, and 50. I'll give an example, 30% maybe in 2018, 30% EMI, maybe $500, $600, $700. You close on the project 5 years later, it's no longer $500, $600, $700. We're talking about $1,300, $1,400, $1,500. And as an elected official, when we go back to the community, we're being viewed as if we're not being honest with our communities. And so that is the challenge that we're having when HPD doesn't close on projects on a timely fashion. And it's frustrating as an elected official when you're going back to your communities and you're reporting back. How many projects do you have on the pipeline that this council approved and is shovel ready, and HPD is waiting for HPD to close?
Let me address the higher level universe, and then Kim can speak to a more granular look at this. But we've got about 750 projects in the queue right now. And in new construction, in any given year, what do we do, 12 to 15 of new construction? A lot more preservation. The lion's share of the work that we do is preserving existing housing stock to keep it affordable. And so we do a lot of refinancing, as you all know, in your districts. But of that 750, approximately, I'm ballparking it, about 300 of those are new construction projects, and about 450 are preservation deals. They require project managers, lawyers, resources, a lot of them on the new construction side, obviously our subsidy, tax credits, and a whole layering of financing. So that's a big universe when you think that only a few of those will get through. And that's why going back to the tools we need is so important. And I know we're going to talk later about the production that we were able to achieve in this last fiscal year, which was stellar. It was the second highest in our history. And there's a lot of firsts and seconds there in terms of record-breaking stuff. But a huge portion of that was tax incentive driven. The new construction that came online were private investors coming into to the city and saying, I have this site, I'll give back 30% of the units for affordable housing. Now, you structured a complicated question about those projects, and maybe you could tackle a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think this is one of, our shared greatest frustrations. And I think every developer that we work with or owner we work with is equally as frustrated. We would love to do more. To do so, we need to all be advocating for broader resources and tools. And that includes, as the commissioners noted, changes at the federal level, right? We have a certain amount of rental assistance that we can allocate every single year that helps finance our projects. We are limited, so just to explain a little bit more about what the commissioner was discussing in terms of tax credits. So we have about 15 to 16 million. We are able to actually allocate 9% low-income housing tax credits. We do a competitive process every year, and we can basically use that to finance about a dozen projects. Those are the smaller, mostly new construction, occasionally preservation projects with really high renovation needs. We also have 4% low-income housing tax credits that come as of right with tax-exempt bonds. So the amount that HPD gets annually, this is very technical, but please bear with me, because this is where a lot of the frustration comes from. We have about 800 million that New York City gets, comes through the state, again, annually. And that allows us to finance about a dozen larger new construction projects a year. So most of the RFP sites that we do nowadays are large projects. I think the smallest one I've seen recently is about 200 units. There's some that are smaller, but most of them are 3, 4, sometimes multi-phase projects that are 2,000 units, right? So if we can fund about a dozen a year, right, that means that those projects that the commissioner mentioned, the 300 or so projects, of course, people are going to have to wait. And that creates all of this frustration around time, cost, affordability. And I think for us, we're trying to deliver as much as possible, right? And so that's where I think we also need to think not only about the federal changes, right? So reducing, I'm gonna, again, be very technical, please bear with me, but for every tax credit project we finance with 4% credits, 50% of the project cost has to be financed with tax-exempt bonds. So that means that 800 million we have to put a lot into every project in order to move the project forward. That is the only way you can get 4% low-income housing tax credits. We've been advocating to reduce that to 25%. That would basically double the amount of production that we could do for new construction projects. We don't even do preservation projects of tax credits, really, at this point. In addition to that, we need to think about other tools. So the City of Yes, opening zoning possibility for development, thinking about projects that can be financed without deep public subsidies, right? So we have been advocating for mixed income development. And I think one of the great lessons of the production in the last year is that we financed almost the most new construction, affordable new construction ever in New York City. And if you look a decade ago, we were doing half as much new construction as we were this year. We did that because of as-of-right programs that don't require the same level of public subsidies, don't require the amount of staff time, right, that having tax credits and subsidy and everything else has in every deal. I'm not saying that's the only approach that we need, but we absolutely need tools that allow us to close as-of-right transactions because it takes less brain damage and less public resources. And it allows us to work in communities across New York City. It allows us to stretch our public investment further and to use the market in high-cost communities to cross-subsidize. So we really do need to think about every piece of the toolbox. We need that multi-prong strategy and that multi-prong approach, because without it, there's no way that we're going to get to where we need to be long-term.
And if we add, Chairman, if we add the ability to do commercial conversions and create mixed-use commercial residential buildings in the central business districts, in these office buildings that are partly empty, and in some cases largely empty. If we raise the floor area ratio and create platforms of real estate for residential development, if we go out to the far reaches of the city where homeowners have a standalone garage or a large basement that they can convert into legal, safe, healthy housing with some tweaks, there are hundreds of thousands of units out there potentially, hundreds of thousands of units out there potentially for us to capture, where working families can start, where a mother-daughter situation can be created, where income can be enhanced for a homeowner who's on a fixed income and in retirement. They need new sources. The potential is there. It has to be a multi-pronged strategy.
All right, thank you. Do projects that are ELA term sheets get priority for closing in the HPD pipeline?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Do projects that are in the ELA term sheet, do they get priority when you're deciding on closing on projects?
Yeah, so the ELA program, the extremely low and low income program, which finances lower income rental housing, is one of the largest that we have in new construction. So it finances the vast majority of our new subsidized, and by that I mean with direct subsidy from the city through our capital budget, mostly low income housing tax credits. The other big programs that we use are the supportive housing loan program, the senior program, and then our mixed income program, which is a little bit of a maybe not named totally appropriately because it mostly actually finances low-income housing as well.
But when you're deciding on closing on projects twice a year, right? You close on projects in June and in December.
Yes.
Are you prioritizing the ELA term sheets over other term sheets?
I don't know that that's the way that we prioritize our projects by program that way. Rather, we look at a couple things. We do try to make sure that we are financing some senior and supportive housing every year. One of our big priorities right now has been prioritizing projects that have a higher percentage of and service support for households exiting shelter. So permanent supportive housing has been a major priority. We finance that in every program in new construction, but there are certainly some projects where there's lower percentage of that and some that are higher. So that's certainly a priority. We also have been prioritizing projects in limited affordability areas. Those are very few and far between right now, and that's a major problem that we all have to solve, right? So those are areas, and Lucy can talk more about that, but have fewer number of units that turn over that are available and are low cost. So we're certainly prioritizing those. We're prioritizing projects with MWBE and nonprofit developers, especially those that have been in pipeline for a long time. Any project that has been in the pipeline for a long time, we also take special consideration for. So at the end of the day, most of the projects that we finance, I just want to be really clear, in new construction, 95% of the units that we finance are affordable below 80% AMI. And it's actually, you know, most of those units, almost half of those units are for extremely low and low-income households. So it doesn't matter if it's ELA or mix and match or senior housing or supportive housing loan program. At the end of the day, that commitment from HPD to finance that housing, to use our scarce resources, that commitment to the lowest income households is there.
Yeah. Do you prioritize projects that are funded through council members' resume funding that we provide? There are many projects that I believe in, and the developer says, hey, I want to fill a gap. It could be $500,000, $1 million, it all depends. Is there a priority when a council member is giving resume money? And if we can give us direct answers, because I have many council members here and I want to make sure we get to all their questions.
Again, it's not quite so simple as like yes or no, right? We have resume requests that go for all different types of things. Oftentimes the resume is not just about, it's not about the speed of making things happen. It's about trying to do something that is outside of program parameters, right? So a council member say, I actually want to go deeper on affordability here than it's in the term sheet. I'm willing to allocate some funds to make it happen. Or a preservation project where, you know, you're hearing a lot of concerns about roof issues, right? And the program is really strapped. And so you might allocate funding to help with that repair. All of those requests for us are priority, right? Because all of the projects are important. I mentioned a few minutes ago the general prioritization framework we have for new construction, and preservation. Our priority is any project that has urgent financial and physical needs. So if there's a resume request that helps us to address urgent physical and financial needs, that is going to be a top priority for us.
Okay. Just very quickly, I know you want to get to the members, Chairman. Having been on the resume side as a council member and a borough president, I know how frustrating it is to sit by and watch them sail by other projects, and your project sits in the queue. It is terribly frustrating for us, as it is for you. The funnel is small, and that's what we're talking about, widening the mouth of that funnel to allow more projects to get through. But I just want to say, on the record, as commissioner, thank you to every member who invests. Yes. Thank you, because you help us pencil out these projects often. There's gaps missing, there's things that need to be addressed at the local level that are very specific to your constituents, and we're able to get to them. Thank you.
I'm gonna I'll hold off the rest of my questions. I'm going to hand it over to Chair Perina Sanchez for her line of questioning.
Right, thank you, Chair. My first question is just a clarification. You mentioned that this last fiscal year was the highest producing fiscal year, second highest producing fiscal year in terms of new construction. Can you help us understand that, because that just doesn't comport with some of our understanding of what production has been like, especially with the staffing crisis at HPD? And in particular, are you including things like NYCHA, any categories, RAD conversions? Are you including any categories that weren't included in previous numbers?
So I'll do a high level and pass it off to my colleagues, but the number that we achieved in this banner year was about 27,000 ballpark. Of those, HPD's share of units that were financed by our agency were just in excess of 24,000 units. Of those 24,060 units, I think that's a number, 12,278 were new construction units, which is about 51%, and 49% were preservation deals that allowed us to refi, fix, and keep housing affordable. So I think I'll stop there to not consume any more time. And Kim,
Yeah, I think the commissioner hit the high level. I think the near record breaking this year was really on the affordable new construction, where it was about 150 units short of the highest level of new affordable housing production on record. And that, as I mentioned, is about twice as much as we were producing about a decade ago. And it is largely because, our amount of subsidized, 100% subsidized new construction has been pretty equivalent, 5,000 to 6,000 units a year, 6,000 units a year. What has really changed is the impact of as-of-right programs that they've had across New York City. And that is both 421A16, inclusionary housing, both the mandatory and the voluntary inclusionary housing programs.
Thank you. Second question is also a clarifying question. If there's any way you can answer it yes or no, that would be helpful. But to follow up on Councilmember Salamanca's questions about what AMI definition year you use to finance, yes or no, it's at HPD's discretion to decide which year?
when a project comes in, the factors that go into it, all the measures are current day measures. As the project ages in the development pipeline, new considerations have to be applied to the project. So we may, based on a request and a need that we identify, say these AMIs need to be adjusted to today's market conditions. Kim?
Yeah, I would just say that, again, the formula we use is federal, right? But the way in which we actually craft our programs and our public investment is ultimately at our discretion, right? So our extremely low and low-income housing rental program, that mix of affordability is because we know that there's a dire need in New York City for housing that serves the need of extremely low and very low-income households. And so programmatically, we can make choices about how we are able to serve different households through our programs.
So consequently, what happens, Chair, is 2/3 of our production hit the extremely low and very low income demographic, which is up to 30%, up to 50% of AMI. Well, that mix, yeah.
In which year?
So overall, last fiscal year, 77% of our housing that HPD financed in some way was for low-income households and below. If you look at our subsidized housing, so where we're investing capital funding, low-income housing tax credits, other tools that are at our discretion, it is for overall subsidized housing, 96% was available for low-income households and below.
Thank you, thank you. Just, just in the same way as we say $2022 or $1958, the way that we talk about inflation, I think we need to talk about these affordability metrics in that way as well, given the changing nature of AMIs, to Councilmember Salamanca's point. But to move forward, and I also want to yield my time to council members here. I'm overall optimistic about the opportunities for collaboration here with the administration. And part of the collaboration that we can have in solving and meeting the challenge of our affordable housing crisis in the city of New York is to provide transparency, transparency from the administration to the council in all areas possible. And so to that end, last year, the Housing and Buildings Committee held a hearing right after the release of Housing Our Neighbors. Housing Our Neighbors blueprint was released, and the blueprint included $22 billion over 10 years to build and preserve affordable housing. We had a very lengthy discussion about the general guideposts that were in the plan and getting down to some of the nitty gritty. And so, we had general guideposts in there like shifting the balance between rental and homeownership, between lower income units and higher income or more working class subsidies, prioritizing projects in areas that have fewer affordable homes, as we're talking about fair housing today. How has the administration started to execute these plans? And in particular, then Chief Housing Officer Katz mentioned that there would be periodic releases and updates for the public on meeting the goals of the housing blueprint. So what has been released, or what can we expect in terms of updates on the plan?
Thank you. Let me just say very quickly, thank you, Chair. These strategies, these goals, these initiatives live in the Mayor's Management Report and in other reports that we continue to produce. Priorities are the same, essentially. And I think First Deputy Commissioner Tagani can provide some highlights and background on how we're addressing that.
Yes, thank you for the question, Chair. Overall, 80% of our initiatives and action items are either in progress or completed. Some highlights is the release of the Preservation Design Guidelines, our new construction design guidelines. Again, these are in the service of not only making our housing both accessible, but then creating efficiency so that we're building projects faster. We've expanded our homeownership initiatives, both the Home First program, the Homeowner Help Desk, and the Home Fix loan program that in particular helps low and moderate income households. We've increased our awareness in the community both on fire safety and code enforcement, as well as the programs that we do through our CBO partners and with our staff. We're looking at the way that our tenants interact with our programs and use things like rental subsidies. We made a commitment to streamline our ability for tenants to work with our programs by removing unnecessary forms, either because of changes that we successfully fought for at the federal level so that people are not constantly proving that they're in need for housing, or because there are certain forms producing information that create trauma for our families. We've also worked to make sure that we have the Partners in Preservation program moving forward to create that partnership with tenants, legal aid, and housing agencies to make sure that the housing people live in is actually safe and habitable. We look forward to launching that program in full. And we're working, as Deputy Commissioner Dargo mentioned, we're working with our priorities to make sure that MWBE and faith-based groups who are already partners in our communities are also developing accessible housing. And that work is ongoing, but we've made great strides.
Thank you, that's helpful. Moving to another set of questions. As the speaker mentioned in her opening remarks, and we all know, from 2010 to 2020, New York City built only about 200,000 new housing units while gaining 630,000 new residents and nearly 1 million jobs. I'm curious if the administration, whether it's DCP or HPD, do you have a sense of not just affordable production, but how many housing units would the city need to be producing per year to meet the current demand? And maybe if not a per year unit number from now until 2030 or something like that? Do you have an estimate?
I will say that based on all the discussion and the testimony and the statements, the need is overwhelming. And if you just look at affordable housing for working families, and there are examples of, a couple, 2 jobs, a child or 2 who just can't make it happen in New York City. If you look at the vacancy rate of less than 1% for units that rent at $1,500 or less a month, it's overwhelming. So there have been attempts by industry groups, by government, by economists to try to nail down a number. And the range, and city planning can speak to this, but it can range from 400 to 700,000 units. And maybe city planning could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, thank you, Commissioner. So this is what the thinking that went into the 500,000 unit moonshot. What do we need to catch up? As for the amount of production that we would need per year after that, again, it's a dynamic system, embeds lots of assumptions. But that's the animating idea behind the housing opportunity text amendments as well. We realize
and that is timeline?
Pardon, Chair? Did you have a question?
Sorry, that's the 500,000 moonshot goal is with a timeline to 2030?
Yeah, the moonshot goal was within the next 10 years. And of course, that will require a range of initiatives beyond even the housing opportunity text amendments. But a particularly important part of hitting those numbers are the recently announced housing opportunity text amendments. For the first time ever in city history, we're putting together a series of zoning changes intended to create more housing in every neighborhood across the city, from the lowest density areas to the highest density areas. The thinking there is, if we're going to produce a lot of housing, we want to do it in a way, like the speaker wants to do it, like everyone here wants to do it, in a way that's equitably distributed across the city, in a way that doesn't expect too much of particular neighborhoods, that doesn't target particular neighborhoods in a way that neighborhoods fear, or that can overtax infrastructure, or other negative consequences. And so, the centerpiece of that strategy is this series of zoning reforms announced last week. I also want to say that the draft scope of work for the proposal, the first major milestone for the environmental review that includes a lot more detail than the mayor even included in his speech last week, will be on our website later today. It may be there as we speak. And so I would encourage all of you to take a look at that, the draft scope of work on City Planning's website, to digest that. And then, of course, we're extremely excited to talk to any of you at any time. We've talked to many of you already about what's in the proposal, and to have that conversation over the next year about how we get to, in collaboration, a series of proposals that really do enable us to, to work our way out of the housing shortage and the range of, really serious human consequences that we live with today.
Thank you so much. There will most certainly be very productive discussions with respect to the text amendments. And in my opening remarks, I started off by sharing that, I personally think that there's a lot to be done in terms of a citywide fair housing framework, right? We don't want to tax neighborhood infrastructure. We want to promote fair housing. We want to produce, make sure that we are producing enough of the lowest income housing, right, for New Yorkers. And so to that, I suppose this question might be more for HPD. I think it's troubling that only 17 items of the 81 commitments that were present in the Where We Live plan have been completed as to February 2023. And Commissioner, of course, you describe them as the rest of them as being in progress. But can you help us understand what has accounted for the slow pace of the commitments? And in particular, you know, the original plan included that the actions were going to be undertaken by 2025. We're halfway through that timeline, but less than a quarter of the items have been completed. So how does the administration plan to meet the rest of its goals from Where We Live, and what are the challenges that you face? And again, this in the context that, yes, we want to increase affordable housing and housing production across the city of New York, but we want to make sure that there are guardrails, and that those guardrails are affirmatively furthering fair housing as goals that we share.
Thank you, Chair, for that question. We appreciate the focus on the information that we put out through the progress report. We think this level of sharing and transparency and accountability is really important. We have had moved a few more to the completed category since we released the report last year. But this is a really important piece of a really important question about our fair housing work and our fair housing commitment generally. I'll start by saying, first of all, we did get off to a slower start because the pandemic did delay a lot of our work in that final year in 2020. But it is primarily because these are very serious and big undertakings. They are not boxes that we can check off and be done with. So while we have been able to move through some of the commitments already and are glad to be moving on and devoting resources to others, a lot of them is the slow, sustained work that goes into deep fair housing planning. And so the reason why we continue to cite the fact that almost 90% are in progress or complete is because that is the work that we're doing, and we think that's really good evidence of how committed we are to these commitments. And they are also reflected in the announcements around City of Yes for housing opportunity. These are some things that will take us a while, and the real work of Where We Live is not the shiny report, though we are proud to have released it. We are committed to the work that goes into the planning for the next one, but it is the intense everyday work that we're doing to affirmatively further fair housing across the board. And so we would be happy to dig into any of those commitments and talk with you more about what we're doing to advance each of them individually.
Okay, thank you. My last question, Chair Salamanca, flagging for you. My last question, and if maybe we have quorum later, I can ask more, but I want to give time to my colleagues. So the Speaker's bill would require a citywide strategic equity framework with goals and strategies to increase affordable housing production and voucher utilization in high opportunity districts, increase preservation and anti-displacement resources in high displacement risk neighborhoods like ours, and increase neighborhood equity investments in underserved districts. Based on the Where We Live plan and other reports, these all appear to be goals that the administration and agencies have already embraced. Can you share some of the ways that the agencies have been making progress on these goals? And does HPD currently seek to focus preservation and anti-displacement resources in high displacement risk neighborhoods as measured by the Equitable Development Data Explorer?
Let me just at the top say or repeat what you suggested, which is that we fully embrace fair housing, creating opportunity everywhere, and that's why it's so important that this City of Yes for housing opportunity moves forward. I think it's expressed in the work that we do in neighborhoods all across the city, whether it's public sites where we fully engage what I call the host community to help us think through where are the opportunities in the area where they live and do business, to capture affordable housing sites and dress them up with the amenities that those neighborhoods need. I hark back to the need for the tools. We need help from this body and from the leadership of the city to continue to get the tools that we need so we can advance the work of fair housing, and I'll pass it to my colleagues.
Apologies. So let me, in order, we can talk about voucher utilization. So for HPD, we are the 5th largest public housing authority, PHA, by the federal government's definition that operates a voucher program, federal housing choice voucher program. Our utilization hovers between 98% and up to 100%. That sometimes we are at complete utilization. That goes to the point that Kim made earlier about how key it is and how much it's integrated into making sure our development program is affordable and accessible. One thing that to really point out here is recently we were in a position to be able to get emergency housing vouchers. The city in total received about 7,800 vouchers that was immediately put to work. We created a new framework to distribute these vouchers to hit our most vulnerable communities, especially given, as Lucy pointed out, the low availability of affordable units. We used a range of new tools, including housing search support, to make sure to connect people to those homes. That is something that we found is integral to making the vouchers work outside the development program and what we're asking the federal government to do. That the larger point is, without the availability of units, without the kind of development that we're trying to achieve in City of Yes, it makes our job that much harder. So housing search support, yes, federal government support to do that with our voucher work, but then again, supply is critical to having a place for the vouchers to go. And then the other thing I would say there is that on the MWBE and faith-based work, vouchers and voucher utilization is part of the dynamics we make to make those deals work as well. And again, HPD is using our full voucher utilization to promote both sides.
And if I may, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the broader fair housing aspects of your question. Where we live and HPD's approach to fair housing reflects a balanced approach. We have to both continue to both invest in communities that have historically experienced disinvestment and desperately need more low-cost and affordable housing, and we need to be able to build more housing in what we have been calling limited affordability areas, or parts of the city that don't have a lot of low cost or affordable housing. That parallels this balanced approach idea where you both need to invest in communities, place-based strategies, as well as create opportunities for New Yorkers to be able to move, or mobility strategies. Because the essence of fair housing, as the commissioner talked about earlier, is about choice. So that's the ability to choose to stay in your neighborhood, in your home, or to move if that's what's best for you. We mentioned this a little bit in Where We Live, but we try to be very careful when we talk about the idea of high opportunity neighborhoods, because that actually is quite complex, and New Yorkers are incredibly diverse and have a huge range of needs and preferences. And so therefore, essentially any neighborhood might be high opportunity for those inhabitants, those residents, or other folks who want to be able to move there. So it is our obligation as city government and as committed to undoing some of the wrongs that government has participated in and has caused when we talk about fair housing, is to really be able to remove the obstacles so that New Yorkers can make that choice. They can decide to stay in their home and in their neighborhood, or they could decide to move to a neighborhood that's better or represents more opportunity for them. So this requires a wide range of balancing. Deputy Commissioner Darga talked about that a little bit in how we think about the pipeline, but also in how we think about the balance of our work and our investments for fair housing.
Let me suggest something very quickly. It's not in any official remarks. I haven't talked to anybody about this. But I think we need to stop using the terminology high opportunity areas, because it suggests that other areas are areas of low opportunity. So I just want to put the thought out there. We could debate it at any time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, I mean, I recall, like, just in 10 plus years of working on these issues, I'd always take offense to people talking about, it was like the fair housing folks who, in one camp that were wanting to create housing in areas that were wealthier, had, more parks, had more, all of the amenities, right? And then the folks who I kind of considered myself in the second camp, which was, you can't take me out of Kingsbridge, you can't take me out of Burnside. This is where I'm from. This is where I want to be, and my neighborhood should be a neighborhood of opportunity. So just want to respect and agree with that classification. We have to do, it's a yes and. We have to, make sure that people have opportunities to live wherever they want to live in existing neighborhoods. But we also have to continue the investments into our lower income communities that have a different set of challenges, like the one that I'm from. There's one sort of corollary question, and then I'll turn it back over to Councilmember Salamanca. I'm curious, HPD, as the 5th largest public housing authority in terms of vouchers that you administer, the way that our city has been tracking affordable housing production, do you track the characteristics of neighborhoods that voucher holders, use their vouchers in? Are we seeing a replication of vouchers being used in lower income communities and such, or are we seeing more of a diversification through the use of vouchers?
So I can start, and I'll ask Lucy to add, but largely our vouchers are almost equally distributed across the 5 boroughs. Our vouchers a significant portion go to supporting very low income and senior New Yorkers. We are seeing it match up with our development portfolio. So as we move to look at low affordability areas, it is also where our voucher population goes to as well. Additionally, as we've pointed out, we've both locally and federally, we've gotten support to look at more mobility programs. So currently, New York was, due to our work and our focus on this, the recipient of a $4 million award to work on mobility programs with our voucher holders, giving them additional support to be able to make choices about where they want to live. We have programs that work with families in our program, Family Self-Sufficiency Program, which is a federal program that we administer locally that, again, builds up family support to create choices and options for those families. So there are a number of programs that we're doing to create new options and opportunities, and we see a lot of distribution across all 5 boroughs.
Picking up from there, there is a parallel discussion to be had in terms of how we think about voucher utilization and where families who have rental assistance can and choose to move. And we know that historically and currently that residents with rental assistance often struggle to find housing in the neighborhoods that they want to move into, particularly if those are wealthier neighborhoods, maybe ones with in a different borough than where they currently live. And part of fair housing is removing those obstacles so that families can make that choice. Not necessarily telling households, this is the type of neighborhood you should live in, or you should live near people with these characteristics and your life will be better, but you should be empowered to use your voucher, your rental assistance, to make the best decision for your household and for your family. So our job is to figure out, how do we remove those obstacles that are getting in the way? And one of the things is that there is a significant amount of discrimination that users of rental assistance, households that use rental assistance, face in the private market. This is a huge concern and something that will really limit the usability, the helpfulness of continued federal assistance through rental assistance if we don't really invest in enforcement. And so we have, and we are working to, we did a pilot this past spring, and we're looking to invest significantly over the next several years to build up the city's enforcement infrastructure, testing and enforcement infrastructure to root out source of income discrimination in the private market, which we do think is another really important step that we're taking.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We have to, if you could just answer the question and move on, because I have a whole panel of council members here. Council member, are we okay with that? Sanchez?
Yes, thank you so much, Chair.
Okay.
Appreciate you. Yep.
All right, we'll try our best to come back to the second round. All right, thank you very much. So we're gonna give our members 5 minutes. I'm gonna ask the panel, please be direct with the answers so we could get as many questions as possible. We're gonna start with Councilmember Krishnan.
Well, good morning, or good afternoon, Commissioner. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for your testimony today, and thank you to Speaker Adams, Chairs Sanchez and Salamanca for today's really important hearing. I'm very heartened by today's hearing and the focus on AFFH and fair housing. This was my career before coming to the City Council. My first case out of law school was the Broadway Triangle fair housing litigation under Bloomberg. Lasted 10 years to de Blasio with a comprehensive settlement. And one thing we saw, and I saw over that time, was in the beginning, fair housing wasn't talked about during that litigation. There was a lot of testimony that we weren't thinking about AFFH. And with the sustained advocacy of the Broadway Triangle Community Coalition, we've seen Where We Live, NYC, and much more. So I want to commend HPD on that focus. At the same time, I still feel like, the Fair Housing Act, as envisioned by Dr. King and in Congress, has a very broad mandate. 3608 is very broad, and it's changed from analysis of impediments to a much more meaningful analysis under Obama. But it seems like New York City's approach to it is still falling short of the broad mandate under prior administrations as well. And I can't help but think if part of that is because we look at fair housing as a citywide issue. But still, we're very diverse as a city. We still have one of the highest segregation indices in the entire country. And I just wonder what steps specifically HPD is taking to look at a neighborhood by neighborhood analysis of AFFH. For example, Boston has a project-based AFFH analysis with developers. Has New York City looked at those things to really not just look at the citywide metrics, but on the neighborhood-specific metrics?
Thank you for that question, and for as a shared fair housing attorney by background. So yes, we have looked at what other cities have done around the country, and we have identified the 30% lowest in terms of neighborhoods across the city, the neighborhoods with the lowest amount of low-cost and affordable housing. To us, this is actually the critical issue, because if there is not enough low-cost housing in a neighborhood, then a New Yorker who decides that's the neighborhood that represents the best opportunity for me and for my family cannot choose to live there. And so we have added that as criteria or points to the qualified allocation plan. That's how we, in part, allocate low-income housing tax credits. So that's going to help us be able to do some of the work to prioritize new projects in these communities. We are also starting to report on it in the mayor's management report, so that we are holding ourselves accountable, and so that everyone can also join us in holding ourselves accountable. This is work, however, that is quite challenging, and it is something that we have been working at and trying to do, and want the council's partnership on it. We have been more successful in certain parts of the city than in others in building and developing more low-cost and affordable housing. So we're excited as well to be here to talk about fair housing, to be able to talk about this bill, to be able to work with you guys on having targets, but also creating a path where we can work with all of you to make sure we really are following through on everything that we're saying here today when we talk about needing housing of all types in all communities across the city.
Thank you. And I just add as my final comment too, I think that'll be really important, and I appreciate and I'm glad to hear this neighborhood-specific focus on affirmatively furthering fair housing. The only other point I'd mention is, I think Chair Sanchez alluded to it as well. What I'm glad about with Intro 1031, the Speaker's legislation, is it specifically takes an anti-displacement perspective. And of course, that in being my work too, that's something that I think, as Chair Sanchez mentioned, we tend to misconstrue what fair housing is when we don't look at anti-displacement. And that's how you end up with, under the prior administration, a number of rezonings and low-income communities of color only. So I would just urge HPD to continue down that route of looking at fair housing from the lens of not just certain neighborhoods only, but how do we keep people in their homes, especially as gentrification increases tremendously in certain communities only in our city. But that anti-displacement perspective is so important, both in thinking about fair housing and investing in legal services to keep people in their homes, and how we think about, again, how we get our segregation index much, much lower than where it is right now.
Absolutely, and one of our 6 goals in Where We Live was about preventing displacement, because it is a central part of our fair housing strategy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Now we will get questions from Councilmember Hanks, followed by Councilmember Dinowitz.
Thank you, Chair Salamanca. I'm done already. That was quick. So I very much appreciate your testimony, and I definitely want to thank the speaker for this important and timely legislation. I'm on Staten Island, and we just released our Staten Island Action Plan, where we're looking to build over 5,000 units of housing. We definitely have the space for it. And I also appreciate this map here that really illustrates that Staten Island North Shore is far behind in low income and affordable units. And so, which leads me to my question, that we do have a lot of housing projects in the hopper, and it's in the queue. And I'm also sharing with Chair Salamanca's frustrations that when we talk about closing on these projects and how do we get them shovel ready. But my question really is, are there pathways that we can discuss with the development who's frustrated about closing, because some of them want to back out? Are there any programs or any pathways we can get to make sure that these projects are done, that we can start lifting these numbers in the North Shore to the point where it's, comparable to the other places in the city? Because we are definitely destitute. We need affordable and low-income housing. So how do we work with HPD and development who have these projects in the hopper that kind of want to, look at other avenues to get these shovels in the ground to make sure that we can provide affordable housing? Thank you.
Councilmember, very quickly, and I'm sure that our Deputy Commissioner for Development, will want to share some thoughts, but our work is driven by the need and the opportunity to deliver in areas of limited affordability. Your borough, Councilmember Borelli's borough, is one of those areas, and patches of it are in this heat map are hotter than other patches. So one, we welcome the opportunity for this new development. I know there was a big announcement, congratulations. Now we have to get past the announcement and get those units delivered. So we look forward to working with you at the host community board, with the borough president there, to deliver on these sorely needed affordable housing units. And the transformation of those areas, I think, is critical for not only Staten Island, but for New York City. It allows us to spread opportunity further, which goes to the city of yes, zoning text amendment. Kim?
Yeah, just really quickly, I know this is great frustration for everyone, ourselves including, about how long it can take. And as I was mentioned, we do need changes at the federal level to unlock resources for us. As long as we are, new construction financing it's expensive to finance new construction, right? And so we either, to create 100% affordable housing, we need layers of subsidy. We need federal low-income housing tax credits, we have property tax exemptions, capital subsidy, rental subsidies. In order to do more, we need to expand all of those pots. I would say the other thing I just want to reiterate is that we need the zoning changes, and we need to unlock the potential of small sites as well as large sites. The large sites are really resource intensive, and they're great, but there's also potential to do so much in little ways throughout New York City. And so, I think that's certainly a priority, and making sure we can unlock as of right tax exemptions for new construction, which, the expiration of the current program, we're not going to get into that today, but without a program that provides an as of right, clear, knowable path, we are really going to be limited in terms of what we can finance in new construction.
Thank you so much. I look forward to talking offline with you and about the particulars of the project. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
I have a quick question before.
And thank you, Chair.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, Councilmember. Thank you for your questions. Before we go on to Councilmember Dinowitz, I'm going to throw a scenario that happened in my district, and I would like to know how often this happens. In around 2017, 2016, I rezoned a piece of property in my district, and the developer, after the land was rezoned, he could not afford the overhead, and so he sold that property to another developer. They had that property for some time, could not afford the overhead, and that developer sold that property to a third developer. Which finally they closed on that project, which I'm happy to hear. But in terms of city planning, When we in the council rezone a piece of property and the developer chooses to sell that property, the new owner, can they build as of right, or they need to build within what was agreed to in the council?
Great question. It depends on the nature of the action. So if it's just a straight rezoning, that's a legislative act. Right. And the new zoning district that was put into place allows what it allows. And when you're looking at a project from the private applicant for that legislative act, that rezoning, you're looking at an illustrative project. And council can and does, make side deals or whatever if they want this or that out of the project. But that's not something that gets baked into the underlying zoning district. That's just a law of general applicability. It allows what it allows on that site. On the other hand, if it's something like a special permit where an applicant is coming in for actions from City Planning Commission, from you, to enable a very particular project, usually it would require waivers to the zoning. And so the deal is you give them waivers to the zoning in exchange for a particular project. In that instance, if you get a special permit, even if the developer sells that, to the next guy down the line, their choice would be either to comply with the particular special permit that was approved by council, including the waivers in exchange for a particular project, or just to develop pursuant to whatever the underlying zoning allows. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but we don't do many special permits here. We do in the council. What we do is we do rezonings based on building affordable housing. How often, HPD, do you keep track of how often a developer sells their land because they cannot afford the overhead while they're waiting for HPD to close on the project?
Kim?
We don't track that. It is not common, but it does happen. And we do hear from applicants that time is money. It is. If we could finance projects faster, they would be cheaper projects to finance.
So basically, I can rezone a piece of property in my district with a developer for 100% affordable housing. They wait a few years, cannot pay the overhead, sell it to another developer, and they come and build market rate.
If the project had requirements embedded associated with the rezoning to be affordable housing, those requirements would survive any transfer. So there's clearly specific, depending on the type of approval, et cetera, but if it is certainly an HPD supported action, any affordability restrictions would be embedded in required of any subsequent owner.
All right, thank you.
And I think, Chairman, if I'm guessing which site it is, that changed hands several times in your district, there were restrictions associated with it, and the ultimate deliverable was, an affordable.
No, I worry, and I'm going to let Councilmember Dinowitz speak, but I worry because in this past administration, there were 3 citywide rezonings that were done, right? You had Washington Heights, you had Soho, NoHo, actually you had Gowanus, and you had Jerome. Yep. And I'm just curious to know, for example, in Jerome, if all those lots that were rezoned, are they building true affordable housing, or did the developer or the property owner sell that land and they're building as of right?
So very quickly, the commitments to 100% affordable rezoning, affordable housing on public lots, those will remain the commitments moving forward. That's our land. We would keep those commitments.
Yeah, but not private property.
So in the Jerome rezoning, the private properties did not have a specific commitment. Our goal was to put forward tools to bring them into a affordable housing framework.
All right, I'm going to let Councilmember Dinowitz ask his questions, but I want to go back to this topic. Go ahead, Councilmember.
Thank you, Chair. I was saying you could take your time. You're the chair, man. And thank you, Chair Sanchez and Speaker Adams. Commissioner, I actually want to commend you. I like what you said. The language with which we use, I think, is very important. And even in your testimony, talking about homes instead of units, I think is an important step forward in the way we talk about what is being constructed. And one thing I've brought up a number of times is not just homes. I know that if I were looking for a new home for my family, I wouldn't search home. I would search 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom home, or as it used to be called, a unit. And with your affordable housing term sheets, it seems that those family units, families who have children, that those units are being disincentivized, right? That you can build a minimum of 30% two-bedroom units, and most developers will choose to do that. Even though it's more efficient per person to build 2- and 3-bedroom apartments, more square footage per home unit, per apartment, you can fit more people in there. And we have this issue, families are leaving. There aren't enough apartments for families, and school enrollment is down, in part because there isn't enough supply of those homes. So I'm interested to know how often you update your term sheets to meet the needs of our city and to meet the needs of specific communities, and what data are informing those term sheets.
Thank you for that question and for the framing. And it is a challenge to answer the need, but our work follows the overwhelming need in the city. And Kim can talk a little bit about our experience in, if you think of these homes as being opportunities to purchase on a shelf, right? The shelf life of a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom unit used to be way longer in New York City. It's still very long. The shelf life, in other words, they're not takers compared to the takers for studios, 1-bedrooms, and 2-bedrooms. They fly off the shelf, and they fly off the shelf because the universe of renters and the universe are single adult households and smaller families. But Kim, you can give some texture to that.
Yes.
And let me just say, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but notwithstanding that, every host community is different, and I think we talked about it before the hearing.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean, is there no data to localize
we
some
look
of the
at
term
those
sheets?
host communities as we sit down with the developer to talk about what to deliver there.
Yeah, so we actually work really closely. See, the policy team and development is both up here because we actually work really closely when we are trying to structure program term sheets to make sure that they are addressing overall housing needs and they are based on data. So Lucy may be able to speak in a minute to like what the data tells us about needs for housing in the city. Generally speaking, in our multifamily new construction term sheets, we do set a maximum of 25% of the units as studio apartments, 15% for 1-bedrooms, and a minimum of 30% of the are 2 bedrooms or more. So we do limit studio production, but
when you're touting the, I'm sorry to interrupt, when you're touting the number of units instead of the number of bedrooms, certainly a developer is going to maximize the number of units that they produce rather than bedrooms.
So that's why we have standards outlined in the term sheet that specifically state the maximum number of studios, the target 1-bedrooms, and a minimum number of 2 or 3 bedrooms that are created.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is they're going to do the bare minimum, but of number of 2 bedrooms because they can. And I know you mentioned 3 bedrooms, but those aren't even on your term sheets. And so I don't know any developer who's, again, incentivized to just create units and units and not bedrooms that would, without any guidance or pressure from you, actually construct 3-bedroom apartments. I want to move on to I have 2 other things that I'll mention in a row to make sure that you hear them. And one is, Deputy Commissioner, you mentioned interagency collaboration. I represent 3 different community boards, 8, 12, and 7, all of which are asking, we'd like to build more affordable housing. Instead, what's happening is DHS is coming in and building shelters. And my view is your job should be to house people permanently and, of course, to the extent possible, put DHS out of business. We want people in houses, not in shelters, but instead that's what we're getting in our community. And of course, I'm interested to know what that interagency collaboration looks like, because it sounds like DSS is kind of just going in, getting these properties and building more shelters. And I will leave it there and ask offline the other question, but I want to hear about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. All of the data sources that we use and look at, including the New York City Housing Vacancy Survey, when we look at the households in shelter, we are deeply concerned about every household type that is experiencing housing instability, but across the board we see greater numbers of single adults and ones and twos, two-family households who are in need of affordable housing. And so that is why our term sheets and that are structured that way, why it's our greater focus. That being said, like all of this, these are things that we have to balance, especially when we're thinking about our fair housing policy front and center. There is a long history of communities, some communities, particularly whiter and wealthier communities, trying to exclude families. So we do think about that as well when we are thinking about what we are building and where we are building. But the data does suggest that the problem is significantly in smaller households. And so we are mindful of that as we are structuring our term sheets. We would love to work with you to build more affordable housing in your district. Again, we are balancing as a city multiple crises, if you will. There are many, many New Yorkers in need of greater housing stability, and there are many, many New Yorkers currently in shelter. This is something that we have to do both.
I know time is against us. We're doing a lot of work with the Department of Homeless Services, with the Department of Social Services, to move families as quickly as possible into permanent housing. We had a banner year of those transfers from shelter to permanent housing. I want to thank you, Council Member, we call it the Salamanca 15, but to all the members who voted yes on that, that was important. And we're working with the development community to, in some cases, increase that share of units or homes so that we can get families out of shelter into permanent homes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would say that a lot of significant development has been done with shelters in our community and not actual housing. And so I want to put that out there because it is a huge problem. I'm sure it's a problem across the city where we're not building for people putting roots in a community. Thank you, chairs. Thank you, Speaker.
Commissioner, thank you for that. You know, when I tried to get that law passed in 2019, HPD, well, prior administration, was totally opposed to that 15% homeless.
It was unpopular at the time.
Yeah, but it's popular now.
Bravo.
Yes.
Congratulations.
All right. I'm going to hand it off to Chair Lewis for her questioning. After Chair Lewis, Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you, Chair Salamanca, Chair Sanchez, and Speaker Adams. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. I'm just going to ask my questions first, and you guys can answer afterwards, since we're short on time. As I'm looking at this map that was given to us here, the total housing development for between 2018 and 2023, the largest number of housing production in Central Brooklyn falls under CB 17 with CB 5 to follow. I wanted to know, while there's development being completed or in progress, we still have a large number of vacancies in some of these areas. So I wanted to know, what could HPD do better to ensure New Yorkers, especially those that live in CB 17 and CB 5, have opportunities and can qualify? We have a lot of people in those areas who are renting rooms, and while we want to accommodate formerly homeless New Yorkers, there's a set aside for them. What we also see is that they're not single adults that live in East Flatbush, East New York areas don't have the opportunities. Second question, if you could give a quick overview of HPD's closing date complexities and shortfalls using CCC Urban Village as an example, where you have a project by a private developer who is faith-based as well and wants to help with our housing stock issue here in the city of New York, and the state actually did their part so that they could get towards the closing date, but HPD didn't do their part to get closer to the closing date. So I wanted to know if you could use that as an example so that the committee here can understand the complexities that you all have with that, what we could do better, and how we could support projects like CCC's Urban Village. Third question, this is in regards to the slate of Article 11s that you all are asking us to support. I wanted to know the $800 million that was mentioned today in your testimony. Is that $800 million going towards the Article 11s that you all are asking us to support here in the council, and so that we could understand part of the housing stock? Does that fall there? And my last question, to specify the tools and incentives that HPD needs to support your financing. You mentioned incentives earlier for housing production. If you could specify those tools for us again. So the first question is in regards to what's happening in Central Brooklyn with vacancies, and then everything else afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis, and thank you for your partnership at the close of the fiscal year as we close the preservation deal in your district that I think is going to deliver phenomenally for that community that's been suffering for a long time. Big questions. You packed in 4 of them. We'll try to.
You can do it.
We're going to try to beat the clock. Look, on the large number of vacancies, I'll let one of my colleagues pick that up. I think we should save that for last. I want to go to the CCC Urban Village project, which we fully support. We've had extensive conversations with the developer there. We're excited about the fact that we can deliver a transformative project for that part of the city, and to do it in partnership with a faith-based organization is a great model. We have expanded our work and continue to expand our work with faith-based organizations. The complexity in the closing cycle, we need hours to address it. Do you want to talk a little bit about the challenge that they face? We partner with the state. We have our own contribution to that project. There was a rezoning action associated with this earlier. There are a number of challenges. Yeah.
So the project overall is going to be, it's huge. It will absolutely be transformative. This is actually a kind of a perfect example of the challenge that we face, right? We want to support it. We want to move it forward. It meets many of our priorities. It's extremely resource intensive. And you were mentioning the kind of $800 million. I'm going to connect these two things. So the $800 million is the allocation of tax-exempt bonds through the state that goes to the Housing Development Corporation that they, with us, allocate to finance low-income housing tax credit projects. Basically, that means it's a federal low-income housing tax credit. That tax credit is sold, that brings in equity investment into the projects, separate from Article 11, which is a property tax exemption, okay? And that project alone, so we can finance about a dozen projects a year, about 2,600 units. That project alone is almost that size. So that's putting aside the capital budget that we would need as well. So in a multi-phase project like that, the challenge we face, we want to do it, we also have needs across all of New York City. And so that's a project where it's going to be phased and it's going to take a while to get all the way through. We are committed. The first phase, the state is issuing the tax-exempt bonds and allocating the tax credits. HPD is bringing the subsidy in and the property tax exemption. So it's actually a partnership with the state to finance the first part. The rest of it, it's going to take some time to get through, and we're going to continue to talk with the development.
While we understand all that, I think what happens is HPD takes a long time to tell the developer or the private entity what the intricacies are, and then it delays the process, in which delays us in trying to get production for housing for the city of New York. So I think you all could do a better job with that. We just wanted to use CCC as an example, and if you could also please specify really quickly the tools and incentives that are needed for financing. Thank you.
So we're very lucky in New York City. I would just say we're very lucky, right? We have property tax exemptions. We have a capital budget that is the largest we've ever had. We have about a $2 billion capital budget this year with a long-term significant capital allocation. We have a significant rental subsidy allocation. We also are an entity that can allocate federal low-income housing tax credits. Amazing tools. We also have the mandatory inclusionary housing program, and we have a great partnership that DCP is leading with looking at zoning now. We also need additional tools and resources, though. So we do need zoning itself to be assessed across the city. We need support at the state level as well. We had a property tax exemption as of right for new construction that no longer exists, and that contributed about half of the production this year. So we expect over the last couple of years that in a time when we're trying to actually address housing need, and that's market and affordable across New York City, that we are gonna lose one of the most critical tools that we have. We also need to look at ADUs and basement conversions. We need to look at commercial conversions, including an incentive to make sure that if there is a conversion, that we can have some affordable housing, right? So there is a huge range of resources that we need. Every single one of these, there are potential opportunities to look at expansion. And so we would be happy to have a detailed conversation with each and every one of those tools to think about how we could do more.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Very, very quickly, you know, I mentioned earlier in the hearing about the fact that there are 750 projects in the queue. 300 of them are new construction, like this one that you brought up. And just on the Article 11, Chairman, if I may for a second, on the preservation side, this is an opportunity for another incentive to get to the right, to preserve affordable housing as it exists across the city, to stabilize those properties. But that tool is absolutely essential for us to be able to do that.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. I have to recognize that we've been joined, I'm sorry, by Councilmember Brooke Powers, Councilmembers Aviles, and Councilmember Feliz. Right before we get to Councilmember Brewer, just want to ask a question here. The Housing Connect, right? One of the biggest complaints that I get when I'm going around in my district saying, I built X amount of units, is I don't know anyone that's moved into that building that lives in the community, right? And so the frustration that I'm hearing, even though there's a 50% community preference, and I know that HPD is very, how can I say, you're very serious on ensuring that 50% community preference is upheld. I know that. But one of the concerns and issues that I get from my community is navigating Housing Connect and the difficulty in Housing Connect. And if you can just explain this to me, one of the issues that I had was that you may have one building in my district, 100 units, and I'm hearing anywhere between 30 to 60,000 people are applying for that one building for 100 units. And residents in my community who may not be as savvy as others with technology, they go and they apply online, and then a few weeks later, they apply again. And it's my understanding that if you apply and you get a number, I'm gonna make a number up, 120, and you apply again, you can get a new number of 25,000, and you fall in that category of the lottery with the last number that you applied. Is that a true statement in terms of Housing Connect, the way it works, Commissioner?
Let me just say that we are now in Housing Connect 2.0.
Okay.
Because of the many problems that 1.0 faced. We are making some technological IT changes, if you will, to it. And I think cleaning up the process, we've made it much more user-friendly, where an applicant now gets to create an account. And so their interaction with the agency lives in their account. One of the improvements, and relatively recently, one of the improvements is that you don't get to just throw a wide net out there. You target specific areas of the city, so you can apply very specifically. What we were getting in the past was that people would just apply in as many places as they could to see what happens, and then they would reject units and they would tie up the system. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
So as quick as I can, so I think part of 2.0 is that there are new profile setups to try to avoid that problem. We're going to confirm right now that this particular log repetition issue is part of 2.0, but the point of the profile is in order to make sure that people aren't repeatedly applying for the same building and creating miscommunication, misinformation. Taking a step back, 2.0 plus the rollout of that came with new training tools. We work with over 60 organizations on the ground, our housing ambassadors, to train people. So we have local educators on the system. We as HPD do events throughout the city on a regular basis to make sure people are aware. Beyond that, there are more technology improvements we're doing to get people into housing faster. So part of the system includes, and I'm confirming, yes, it is part of the new profile piece that was changed. Part of the system is also to increase more speed by removing paperwork and double counting or double auditing on the back end. So we moved from a front end check to a back end check. This allows us to get people into housing faster. We created a profile this way. The double log system is fairly pulling the log numbers as people apply. Additionally, with our housing ambassadors, if you are not technology friendly, you can apply by paper and still enter the lottery if you don't want to use the profile, and we count for the double log. So those are some of the things, and with more time, I'm happy to talk about all the things we plan on doing for 3.0.
All right, thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Councilmember Brewer, followed by Councilmember Boucher.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody, and thank you for asking that question, Chair. So I want to talk about Manhattan. So in terms of my 200 ULURPs that I did as borough president, the previous administration said only affordable will only be subsidized by the private sector. I want to know if there's any subsidy going into Manhattan projects, because what happens is we would love to have more affordable housing in the borough of Manhattan, but without the subsidy, it's very difficult. Question number one. Question number two, with this, I totally agree with the fact that we'd like to have more affordable and less of the those that are temporarily housed. But what's going to happen is some of them are going to move. There are going to be less people, hopefully in terms of the migrant community, and then single room occupancies are going to be available. Will HPD or the city help nonprofits purchase them because they're for sale and they're just making money now temporarily? So that's question number two regarding Manhattan. Number three, the FEPS voucher being increased is great, but you still can't get an apartment. I can't get a studio in the borough of Manhattan. I just want to make clear, when you say we want to be diverse in terms of where we're moving, forget it. I got 6 people in my office right now with vouchers, single people, and we're taking them elsewhere. There's no place in Manhattan you can get an apartment. And then also I want to just talk about the religious opportunities. There are churches and synagogues. What are we doing to make sure that what they do is they'll have 2 nearby churches for sale. They'll make one high income and maybe one, because the Catholics will do this, affordable. They should all be affordable. What are we doing to help them be affordable? I also want to mention, I know that others may do this with NYCHA. We got, 6,900, 6,200, I don't know the number, of vacant apartments. That's not your problem. We asked the question thanks to the chair the other day, but it's one city, it's one administration. Those apartments sit empty. I don't know the solution, but it is insane to have them all be sitting there vacant. I also going to mention, Mr. Tajani knows, what about Harbor View? That's 100% affordable, was promised as part of Hudson Yards. Nothing has been built. Everybody wants it built. What's going on with Harbor View for affordable housing? And then 59th Street, I complain because it's a brand new building. It's going to be a shelter. I don't understand why it can't be permanent housing. So really my questions are about Manhattan. How are we going to deal with more affordability, as the speaker has suggested and others in the borough of Manhattan, if there's no subsidy, no support on the religious, and no purchase of the SROs. It's great to have commercial conversion. Even the mayor has announced none of it will be affordable. Maybe if you get some state 421A, if that ever happens, but otherwise, it's not going to be affordable. Maybe it fits into your 500, but not one unit of affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Brewer. You packed a lot in there, so let me just...
I could keep going if you want.
No, I know you can. Let me give you the shortest answer to your first question, which was, is there subsidy going into Manhattan? The answer is a resounding, very large yes. And we can give you a breakdown of where we have applied subsidy. In terms of helping nonprofits, We work very closely with nonprofit developers. We've set up programs specifically for them to help them purchase property through the New York City Acquisition Fund. That was open to everybody. It's now open to nonprofits and minority and women-owned business enterprises for site acquisition and other supports in the development process. You mentioned city FEPS. I'll let somebody else tackle that. We've created the mayor's office has created an office of faith-based opportunities.
I know them.
Yeah, there's an ongoing discussion.
Ongoing is the operative word.
Yeah, no, it's ongoing because there are so many opportunities for us to capture affordable housing in many communities across the city, and there are many faith-based organizations that are willing to step up. We have capacity building on our side. Ahmed Tigani can talk a little bit about that work. He's at the lead of that with a team. And then Harbor View and 59th Street, maybe some folks can pick up on those.
Tigani knows it well.
So on Harborview, we're talking with NYCHA. They have a larger development plan, and HBD is ready and working to play our role, but we know that that's an important site to you. On the faith-based piece, I will say, and Kim can speak to it, we have faith-based developers we're working with now, and we have multiple projects that recently closed, are in our pipeline. It's one of the considerations that we're working on. The mayor's leadership on faith-based work is something that comes out of a summit from last year. We're looking both at the financial tools, professional development, and trying to speak to churches early about what the opportunities are so that they can come into a development pipeline. And I think...
SROs.
Oh, so the mayor has again made clear that we're looking at Share NYC on a larger scale. We're looking to bring shared apartments and shared housing as another housing type, given the need for that housing type being demonstrated in many parts of the city. So we have one great project on 106th Street in Councilmember Ayala's district that's moving through ULIRP now. We hope that is going to be an opportunity to learn and build from, to build a broader set of shared housing projects in the city.
Okay, and what about just conversion for Midtown being zero affordable?
So the list of questions, we are trying to organize ourselves into who is going to take what, not very artfully, apologies for that. So on your broader Manhattan questions, which cover a couple of the questions as you noted, the commissioner said, yes, many parts of Manhattan, though not all, are limited affordability areas. That means that there is not that much low-cost housing, and we are prioritizing the projects in those neighborhoods in various ways so that we can make sure that we actually get those projects over the line. Some of those neighborhoods are also high-cost areas, which means they are quite expensive to build in. Most of our, as you noted, most of our affordable homes we've been able to create in high-cost areas across the city, and those are different concepts, and we think they're important to really diagnose each fair housing challenge a bit separately, has been with, as of right, new construction tax incentives, either independently or in coordination with subsidy. It's why it's one of our most important fair housing tools, having an as-of-right new construction tax incentive with deep affordability. We are seeking, and DCP could talk more about commercial conversions if helpful, but we are seeking to get affordability through all of our programs, and that includes Manhattan, it includes the high-cost parts of Manhattan, includes the limited affordability parts of Manhattan. And we want partnership with the council, with state electeds, to make sure that we have the path for doing that. Some of that relies on us. You've heard us talk a lot about how we can use either public-private partnerships that we have, additional subsidy differently. That allows us to then more effectively get to some of these projects we've all talked about, whether they're the more deeply affordable projects, whether they're the projects that are in higher cost parts of the city. So we want to work with all of you. We want to overcome the frustration we're all talking about to be able to move more projects forward and to be able to focus our resources as efficiently as possible. On the city for HEP's question, DSS is not here, and we would generally defer to them. Some of their policies and practices are different from Section 8. However, what we will say is that we do look very carefully at where New Yorkers are able to lease up vouchers, and we know that source of income discrimination is a rampant problem in the city and requires a robust response. And so that is one of our primary responses right now, is how do we make sure that when there are apartments available, and we do believe there are, we've been up here talking about housing shortages and how expensive housing is, but if those homes are not accessible to people with vouchers because the owner's not willing to take them, that's the first impediment. And we could offer as much money as possible, and they will not accept it. So we need to invest in that, and that's our plan, one of our plans.
Just quick follow-up on the faith-based organizations aspect to your question. I know you were a leader on that when you were borough president as well, spoke to your task force there a couple times. Ahmed and I are participating very closely in the working group, and in fact, the housing opportunity text amendments, among the details that might not have made it into the mayor's speech, but will be in the draft scope of work, are several things that we're doing for faith-based organizations and campuses across the city to enable more development sites on faith-based campuses, to enable conversions. This was an ask from the work group for old, monasteries, convents, old Catholic schools, things like that. Also, even landmark TDR liberalization.
Be careful on that one.
To enable the hundreds of religious landmarks around the city actually to use that program for the first time. And then cleaning up on the conversions piece. We had a conversions task force, multi-agency last year, based on the merging out of the council bill, actually. The feasibility analyses there showed that it's a pretty small minority of existing office buildings where conversion is feasible even in the absence of affordability requirement. Once you layer on an affordability requirement, that the feasibility goes to zero, basically. So we're strongly advocating for a tax incentive from the state so that we can get affordability in those conversions. Unfortunately, we don't have the local authority to do that here, but we're doing the regulatory piece with our local authority and then advocating strongly for the tax piece from the state so that we can get that done.
And then just on the voucher piece, for Section 8 vouchers, we have something called exception payment standards, which in low affordability areas actually pay a higher, it's called a HAP contract, a housing assistance payment contract. So we're trying to meet the need by using these exception payment standards.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for that. We now get questions from Councilmember Bottcher, followed by Councilmember Rivera.
Thank you so much, Chair. Commissioner, earlier you said that the housing shortage that we're facing is a national crisis that requires a national response. I would also suggest that it's a global crisis that requires a local response. And the reason I say that is because the population of Earth has increased from 2.5 billion people in 1950 to 7.7 billion people today. The world population is expected to increase to 8.6 billion in 2030, 9.8 billion in 2050, and 11.2 billion by the end of the century. Those are figures that should concern all of us a great deal. What are the implications of this population growth, not just for the planet, but for New York City? But considering the planet, what are the implications for the Earth, for natural habitats around the world, for species, for farmland? And the question is, how will this population growth play out around the world? Will it take the form of suburban sprawl, low-density development with single-family homes where personal vehicles are needed to get around? Or will that growth take the form of denser communities, multi-family homes, walkable communities with public transportation, communities fueled by green energy. And what is our role in all this in New York City? Unfortunately, as a city, we've been falling short. And this map says it all, with whole swaths of the city barely producing any housing at all in recent decades, enforcing urban sprawl. So today, I'm so proud to be part of this city council that's stepping up as a council, and the speaker's legislation that I'm proud to co-sponsor that says we're going to set targets, housing production targets around the city with the expectation that we're all going to have to produce our share of housing. So today the city council is stepping up. We're going to set targets for housing production. My question is, how will you, HPD, meet these targets? If we're setting targets, we're looking at how long these projects are taking, the sluggishness of housing development, even when it is allowed. How are you going to step up and help address this crisis?
Thank you, Council Member. You bring up some very important questions that we have to tackle as a global community, let alone as a nation and a city. The premise of your questions lead to smart cities, efficiency, efficient resource management, feeding the globe, housing the globe. How do we do it? What's the least impactful way? And how do local governments and municipalities then sort of unroll that or unleash that or allow it to happen in a smart way? And I'll suggest that the mayor has taken, and this administration has taken on that challenge with City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, City of Yes for Sustainability, City of Yes for doing business in smarter ways in this town. And we have a number of initiatives that address those questions. The role we play is to partner with host communities in the thin slice that we're responsible for. We need hundreds of thousands of units. They will be stacked vertically for the most part. They ought to be, and I know this is a sort of a city planning conversation. I tell my folks, we're a planning agency. You know, we go into an area like at 388 Hudson in the West Village that you represent, and we call the question, what ought to be here? We have a city resource of land that's super valuable in a high cost, very expensive real estate market. And we have an opportunity to create affordable housing vertically, take advantage of the surroundings, marry the school, marry the services, marry the open space. You said yes, the borough president said yes, the community board said yes. That host community is stepping up. And that's going to be 100% affordable housing. And it's going to be lots of units. And, you know, I know I'm taking just a tad too much time, but when the host community said to us, you came to us with a plan, it's not enough, we need more affordable housing, we were so encouraged. And we hope to partner with all of the members in this body, all 51, in every corner of the city to identify those opportunities and to roll out that City of Yes carpet that allows us to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Before we go on to the next council member, I want to ask questions about staffing that you utilize for closing of projects. Commissioner, you're responsible for the closing of projects, your division?
Yes, I am.
Okay. How many staffers do you have? Or, how many staffers do you have, and how many vacancies do you have, just for the of closing of projects?
We have a vacancy rate of 25%. So it's about 100 vacancies currently. It's down from, I will say, it is down from where we were a few months ago for a variety of reasons. OMB, I think, worked with city agencies to try to figure out how to streamline process. It made a big difference for us. The collective bargaining contract with DC 37 certainly, we think, has really helped from a recruitment and a retention perspective. And we have been basically aggressively attending hiring fairs, but the challenge for us is not over yet.
So you're down 100. How many, what should you, at full capacity, full staffing, what would the number be?
About 400.
400. So you're down, okay, so you're down 100. What's your retention rate with these staffers?
I don't have that with me today, but our attrition rate has dropped a lot. So during the early years of the pandemic, we, like I think many employers, private, public, had really significant turnover. That has really slowed, and I think in large degree because of the collective bargaining efforts. I also would say it's a little bit of like, we have to set aggressive but realistic goals for our staff. And I think we have really tried to figure out how far we can push, but also make sure that our staff at the end of the day can achieve those goals. And I know our first deputy commissioner who oversees, the HR and budget situation more generally for the agency may be able to speak.
Right. Because I want to get to the other council members. What's the starting salary for these staffers in this division?
So a project manager, you might love this. I started at HPD a long time ago, now actually a decade and a half ago, and our starting salary was about $60,000 to $65,000 for a project manager. Until very recently, it was still $60,000 to $65,000 for project manager.
What is it now, starting salary?
We just raised it to $77,000. The starting, I just want to be clear, these are staff that have both masters, usually have master's degrees in business, public policy, urban planning, number of other professional fields. So we've looked at starting salaries for staff, for people that are leaving those degree programs to figure out what would be competitive. So we're trying to get closer to competitive salaries.
Salaries low. We have to help you see how we increase those salaries. In speaking in the development world, speaking to HPD, speaking to private developers, speaking to former employees of HPD that are now in the private sector, they're making 2 to 3, 4 times more than what they were making at HPD, with the wealth of knowledge that they receive from HPD to maneuver the system to close on projects. And I want to help you figure out how we can help you in terms of that retention rate, decreasing it so that you can have staff so we can close on these projects. We're going to hear from Councilmember Rivera, followed by Councilmember Brooke Powers, Aviles, and then Feliz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. Working in government in public service is such a privilege. But when you look at July numbers and the average rent in Manhattan is $5,500 and you're making $77K, it's really, really tough. But I just want to say it is a privilege to work in government with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So in your new homes development number that you all have cited multiple times, you include homes that have been preserved, fixed, and created. Those were words that you all used. So it includes, and I'm building on Chair Sanchez's question, that does include RAD PAC conversions, right? And things that are NYCHA related?
About 2,600 units of that, just shy of 2,600 units are RAD PAC related. The balance, 24,060 or so, are financed, 5,149 new construction preservation.
Would it include a place like Stuytown and the preservation efforts that were just included?
When we financed HDC, I guess, specifically financed Stuyvesant Town back in like 2015, 2016, that was counted as a preservation project.
I just asked because some of these preservation projects and some of these conversions aren't actually permanently affordable. they'll be, affordable for 25, 30 years. And so, that creates a problem unto itself. But I just want to move on. What are you counting as fixed? Like, what's an example of something that was fixed? You use that word.
I want to talk a little bit about preservation.
So we have a huge range of preservation programs that assist everything from, single-family property owner to very large multifamily like Stuyvesant Town. And we assist properties in a variety of ways. So fix can be specific to the property, right? So that's everything from helping make sure, and especially in this climate, projects can cover their expenses. So we mentioned earlier Article 11. We have a couple property tax exemptions that are available for affordable housing projects. We also help with renovations, and that's one of the biggest things that we do. And we've seen increasing need over the last couple of years as operating costs have gone up, including maintenance costs, and the cost of debt has gone up, where applicants are increasingly seeking HPD help for renovations and repairs. Those are really the two big interventions. There's certainly other strategies that we will deploy on a project-by-project basis, including bringing in rental assistance, project-based rental assistance. But the two biggest interventions are property tax exemptions and loans for capital improvements.
And I thank you for that, because I know we've worked on some HDFC projects in my own district, and that's really important to keeping long-term residents in place. So I'll just ask my last two questions briefly. Thank you for thanking us for Reso A money. I think we've all rehashed here today the frustrations, because the delays, they actually decrease the value of the money, right? Every year that passes, that $500K that we put towards an affordable housing project just becomes less valuable. And so you said you want to widen the funnel for the 750 projects in the pipeline. So how are you doing that? I mean, really briefly, because I feel like we've spoken like very general level. And specifically, you mentioned prioritizing not-for-profit developers. And at the last Housing and Buildings hearing, Deputy Commissioner Tagani with a hard G, is that right? Just letting, explained, it's all right. They call me Carolina all the time, so. Deputy Commissioner Tagani explained that there's a task force looking at the contracting process for housing development, specifically in regards to CLTs and nonprofits, and how to streamline that process. So what has been found so far? Is the administration planning to create new community land trusts, and what has the administration done to support CLTs? And my last question is really numbers. You mentioned a rezoning in a transit-rich area in my district. I think everybody's very familiar, from 2021, that included Soho and NoHo. That was intended to maximize the creation of new affordable housing without displacing the long-term residents there. Do you have an update on new projects that will include affordable housing in that area in terms of both total units in the pipeline, estimated units within the next 5 years, and how many residences were actually preserved in the rezoning? Thank you very much.
So maybe I can start, and then Ahmed, do you want to jump into? Yeah, so just one quick note. So just nonprofit CLTs. So we have a range of tools that are specifically designed to support and allow provide additional support for nonprofits, and I would say also minority and women businesses. That includes the acquisition fund. It includes the equitable ownership requirement that we now have on RFP sites. And I would also just state that CLTs are formed as nonprofit entities, and so they have access to those tools as well. One of the biggest challenges that we had, and I think when we had a hearing in the spring, this was one of the issues, is that our loan authorities still do not, but we're getting over that hump, allow us to provide assistance for properties on ground leases. And so the state legislature did pass legislation that changes that. We're still waiting for the governor to sign that legislation, but we all, I think, expect that it'll be soon. And that will remove one of the big hurdles that we've had in supporting CLT specifically, which are structured on ground leases. Ahmed, I think there's a couple other.
I'm trying to remember the actual conversation. There was questions from even the hearing before that from Councilmember Caban. I think this came up again when it came to discretionary dollars that went to nonprofits. In particular, we're trying to look at how that moves through the process faster. So looking at both the responsibility determination, even further back, the scope of work, and trying to, I guess, frame that out as templates so that we're not recreating the wheel every time and trying to get them to discretionary dollars faster. In addition, just with CLTs and development, we do have a point team, an executive director for community land trusts. We work with them both on the development side, we're working with them both on the contracting side to make sure that the money that they're getting for their offices is coming quickly, because that's what discretionary dollars do, and that they have opportunities in our projects, including calling out community engagement as a preference in our RFPs.
Let me just take this opportunity for a commercial break and to engage you as our business partner, if you will. We're waiting. We were fortunate to get two of our legislative requests through. One was J51, which is all about preservation, and that's the tax incentive that Kim was talking about. To all of the people in this body who said yes and advocated for that, thank you, because it got through. And the Housing Affordability, Resiliency, Energy and Efficiency Improvement Act, which expanded our lending authority and allows us now to work with community land trusts. But Kim mentioned it earlier. I want to beseech you to send a message together with us to the governor, hurry up and sign the bill. I know that probably is awkward, what I just said, but we need it. We need to hurry up and get this out of the gate. She's been a terrific partner, Governor Hochul, and now we just need her to sign the bills.
If I can follow up then as well, you said what are the tools that we need that allow us to expand the funnel? So some of these are things that we've mentioned, but we need our ability to develop more, in particular new construction housing, is not just based on the amount that the city puts in, but a lot of it is based on the amount of low-income housing tax credits we have, as Deputy Commissioner Darga explained. So we have been advocating at the federal level for changes that will allow the city to actually better capitalize on the resources we have and actually use more. So that's the work at the federal level. At the state level and at the local level, there are zoning changes, and we've talked a lot about, as of right, new construction tax incentives with deep affordability. All of these are things that allow us to stretch our resources further, because if we get back to where we started at the beginning of this, when we talk about a moonshot goal of 500,000 units or homes, we're talking about a lot and not something we're going to be able to do at the rate that we can do it alone. And so we need partnership at all of these levels and with communities to recognize that we need housing of all types in all communities.
I know you want us to be partners. You've said it multiple times. I don't think we're here asking you these questions if we don't want to be your partner. So having said that, we would love to advocate. You know how much the state legislators love when we tell them what to do. But we're definitely going to be a partner on that. So if you could just briefly, my commercial break is to advocate for a piece of land. It's what was previously St. Emmerich's Church on Avenue D. And it's the Archdiocese property. It's really important that we develop that with as much affordable housing, low-income housing as possible. So I just want to make sure we move that along because I don't have much time. And just the numbers for the Soho NoHo rezoning. That was my last question, and I want to thank the chair for being so gracious.
So we can get back to you on the numbers for Soho NoHo rezoning. What we've seen is that in the neighborhood-wide rezonings, it does take a bit longer for units to be proposed and buildings projects to be proposed because they're not necessarily in the pipeline or in development yet at the time of the rezoning. So this is some of the trend that we've seen, but we do expect that we will start to get more affordable homes in those neighborhoods soon.
Thank you, Councilmember. We'll hear next from Councilmember Brooke Powers, followed by Councilmember Aviles and Councilmember Feliz.
Thank you, chairs. Few questions. I want to know if you could first walk us through the administration's goals to expand the availability of homeownership opportunities, especially in lower income areas and communities of color. I often hear the conversation about building housing, and what that housing has largely been has been one type of housing, which is low-income rental properties. And there are communities like the one that I represent that have a high desire and interest to expand homeownership opportunities, especially in light of the flight of Black New Yorkers leaving New York City, largely being priced out of New York City. Also, I want to touch briefly on two programs, Home Fix and Home First. On Home First, per HPD's Where We Live Progress Report released earlier this year, the city expanded the program to offer first-time homebuyers up to $100,000 in down payment assistance. However, from October 2021 to December 2022, just 120 households received assistance from Home First. What efforts are being made to publicize the Home First program? Does the administration hope to expand the number of users of this program? And if so, what does that look like? And on Home Fix, HPD launched the program in 2019 to fund home repairs for low and moderate income homeowners repairs so that they can remain safe in their homes. But as of earlier this year, the program had only served 94 homeowners. There are more than 1 million owner-occupied units in the city. And I know my office gets a lot of calls, especially from seniors needing this resource. So what efforts are being made to publicize the Home Fix program? And does the administration hope to expand the number of users of this program? And I'd like to know exactly how the administration plans to do so.
Thank you, Council Member. I'll just open up with this comment and then pass it out over to Deputy Commissioner Darga, who administers this basket of programs. Homeownership is one of a suite of opportunities, right? Many opportunities that we offer New Yorkers to have access to fair housing in many neighborhoods across the city. All of the work we do, and when the speaker offered her comments, I responded to those. All of the work we do is wrapped in the pursuit of creating a city of opportunity for everyone, right? We're charged in making sure that the city is affordable, that those opportunities are fair and touch every need. The overwhelming need that we answer is affordable rental housing, but we also have programs that offer affordable homeownership opportunities and opening the door to create multi-generational wealth for families and an opportunity to own a piece of real estate.
I personally feel that there has been an effort by the agency to move away from affordable homeownership opportunities.
I will say this, and then I'll pass it to the Deputy Commissioner, but the mayor in the last cycle made one of the largest investments in homeownership programming, and you'll hear about the down payment assistance program growing, the Home Fix growing, outreach to homeowners, a homeowner help desk growing and expanded citywide. So the commitment is there, and maybe you can give some texture to that.
Sure. So a couple things. So Home First, as you noted, we did increase the amount from 40 to 100,000. And we also just increased the funding. So we actually rely on federal home funds to administer that program. And so we did go through the process of expanding the amount of home funding that we're putting in so that we can serve more homeowners. This is the first year that that's happening. So we would expect some ramp up over the next couple of years. Second, we are in the process of identifying another servicer for the program so that there are a couple organizations out there that can work with potential applicants. And third, we are looking to, for the first time, and this is also dependent on our loan authority that we talked about a minute ago, expand the program potentially to moderate income homeowners, so between 80 and 120% AMI. It's exclusively been available to households under 80% AMI historically. So those are three things that we're doing in order to expand capacity there. It isn't where we want it to be yet. It's going to take us a little bit longer, but we're certainly on that path. Home Fix, also a really critical program. We first launched...
Sorry, before you move on to Home
Sure.
Fix, what efforts are being made to publicize that program?
So
I know
one-
you said you want to get new partners, but in terms of marketing, is there anything being done like that in terms of, the mayor has a radio program each week that he's on. Is he talking about that? Are you putting it in ethnic newspapers? What is the grassroots effort to get that information out from the administration?
That is a great question. And I think the problem historically has been we've had one servicer and limited funding, and so we have not really done that. As we identify a second servicer and we have more funding available, I think we can talk about how to increase marketing so that it is more broadly known. But we just haven't had enough capacity to really go.
I encourage you to look at earned media too, writing an op-ed, doing press releases around that.
Right.
That's a start as well.
I love that suggestion.
Just to add very quick, so that's exactly the direction that we want to do more of. So when we launched, when we celebrated the Homeowner Help Desk, and then we celebrated the announcement of the Homeowner Manual that was released last year, that came with it with a number of weeks of earned media placements in ethnic media. We also, since then, have counted a lot on the promotional and marketing ability of the dozen or so CBOs we work with as part of the Homeowner Help Desk. Again, completely aligned. We need to do more. We need to put more muscle behind it. But right now, we have been doing op-eds. We have been working with CBOs, and I think we do need to talk more about getting to the next level. But with the launch of the Homeowner Help Desk citywide, we'll have a better platform to do that.
And I encourage you to also leverage social media and the council members. If you create the graphics, I'll post it every other day on my social media platforms as well, because I truly think it's important that people know that this is available.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes the hurdle to homeownership is that down payment, because the mortgage is often cheaper than the rent.
Yeah, agreed.
We welcome the opportunity.
I do want to just really quickly speak to Home Fix. So we initially funded that as a 3-year program. We relied on a combination of some city funding with a lot of non-city funding. And as the commissioner mentioned, the historic investment last year was in 3 areas: the Homeowner Help Desk, the technical assistance piece that we just talked about, Home First expansion. The final part was Home Fix, the home repair program. We're in a transitional moment right now. So the original 3-year program, we funded so far a little over 200 repair loans. We expect the new program, once it's up and running next year, we're in the procurement process right now, will serve more than that annually. So that funding, like I said, we're just in the procurement process, so it'll take us a few more months to get it up and running.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just also wanted to note that we talk a lot in fair housing about the difficult policy balance, and sometimes that policy balance is both making sure that we're making homeownership opportunities widely available to more residents, while also making sure that every community has rental housing. So if there are communities where there isn't low-cost and affordable rental housing, that also is going to be a priority, because the overwhelming majority of New Yorkers and those who are experiencing significant housing instability are looking for rental housing. And so we want to continue to balance that and make sure that we're getting at least some rental housing in all of the districts across the city.
I will say I somewhat agree with the statement you made, because yes, you do need a mixture in terms of the type of housing stock that you do have. But when you look at, for example, Council District 31, where we have significant low-income rentals that have been built and that is in the pipeline to be built, and then compare it in terms of homeownership opportunities, Ocean Crest, which we were able to achieve more recently. Is the first time in about 15 years that the agency has developed affordable homeownership in that district. But you have several thousands of new low-income rentals that are being built there. But I also think when you talk about policy, you have to, when you engage with the different districts, work with the members in terms of what we see that our community is advocating for. Oftentimes I feel like we're being forced into taking one or not having anything at all, when the goal is to build housing, but it's to build the housing that the local community, to be able to keep those folks in that community also. So I think that needs to be prioritized in the policy that you're doing. Thank you, chairs, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Councilmember. We will now hear from Councilmember Aviles, followed by Councilmember Feliz.
Great, thank you, chairs, for this important hearing, and want to thank all the public servants at this table that work in your agencies every day on this very critical issue. While I really appreciate the noble words of opportunity and fairness and all the things that you mentioned that are part of this plan, we have to acknowledge that in a capitalist system that commodifies housing, these principles are constantly undermined, right, towards the work that we're seeing, that we purport to move towards. And in fact, under the guise of, I have so many questions. Under the guise of the tools, right, I think we often feel, because we are in this crisis, that all these tools clearly have limitations, and often see why aren't they functioning to the maximum capacity that we have, which is part of the challenge. So under that guise, I was curious about a couple of things. When we see projects that are coming for ULURP, right, the 25% MIH tool is woefully just inadequate. And while we understood back in the day when it was introduced, it was revolutionary. Oh my God, you actually have to produce some kind of affordable housing. It is not materializing years later the levels of low-income housing that we need. Are you considering revising the MIH tools to increase that percentage? Why not? And also in terms of other tools, what I don't see, and I'd love to hear more about, is where our seniors fall. This is my greatest heartbreak every single day in my office, is to have seniors who have no place to go, renting single rooms in homes and just at the brink of displacement. And I have no tool other than to tell them Housing Connect, which they do not understand, and often they're not even qualified for what's listed on Housing Connect. I'd like to hear more about what the agencies are doing specifically around income source discrimination. We write letters all the time to tell landlords you can't do that, it's against the law, and they laugh at me, and we still have residents we can't support. So what exactly does increased law enforcement look like, increased enforcement around this issue look like? And I'd also like to know if, given under the guise, again, of tools, if the agencies and the administration is supportive of using, of a public bank, right? Under the guise of using New York City's most formidable public deposits and using it for the things to finance and capitalize the things that we need in the city, rather than allowing corporations to both not only make money off of our money, but then tell us whether or not what we can use it for. So I'd love to know whether the administration is truly going to consider and put forward some heft around using our deposits for our good, public resources for public good. I'll leave it at that.
Just little things.
Oh, and NYCHA, and so much conversation about NYCHA. Last one to add. Councilmember Brewer mentioned, I guess, the Noble development, and I think Commissioner Tagani, if you could talk specifically more about what you were suggesting there, and why HPD isn't throwing down on the 6,500 vacant units that are sitting in NYCHA, because it affects the whole system. It is not just a NYCHA problem, it is a New York City problem. Thank you.
So let me just take a sort of a top line on the multi-pronged approach and the multiple tools that we need. And you're right, we are operating in a capitalist system, and those are sort of the laws of gravity that we operate in to try to, and to manage those tensions to finance public interest projects that deal with large societal issues. On the MIH tool, it has been successful and always can be more successful. That mandatory inclusionary housing lives with and rides with a new construction tax incentive that invites partners to invest in what we've characterized here as an overwhelming housing need in New York City, right? And we have an incredible supply problem that needs to be addressed. The city's role is somewhat limited in that. I mean, HPD's is a thin slice of a very large market. So what we try to do is to take this multi-pronged approach and apply tools to address that need. And my colleagues can add a lot of texture to that. I want to go to the older adults, and we can come back to the tools. But on the older adults, I just want to say, for purposes of sort of the public conversation, we have a number of programs to address older adult housing needs, and some of them are historically targeted, and we've dedicated buildings to older adults. But the biggest opportunity that we have to address the need for affordable, stable, safe, healthy housing for older adults, older New Yorkers, is preservation and allowing them to age in place in a healthy way, whether it's in the old housing stock that gets improved and modernized and made sustainable, or in our new developments. And the team can talk a little bit about the programs and how we address that. I'll finish with this, and then you guys can take the rest. We created as an administration an older adult interagency working group. Commissioner Lorraine Cortez Vasquez chairs it. I co-chair with other agencies, and we're coming to the table with additional solutions for how do we allow older New Yorkers to age in place in a healthy way, and we as public agencies to sustain that and to support that.
Yeah, I certainly believe in aging in place. Nevertheless, in a gentrifying community of which I represent, they are pushed from their apartments into now single rooms, and with no other place to go. So I'd love to see the city include in its toolbox the same way we have set-asides for homeless, for unhoused New Yorkers, where we're building in every development units for seniors as well, as just a matter of practice.
So just on the lottery piece, I think we'd like to offline with your office about just the navigation of Housing Connect for seniors. We can work with you and the local housing ambassador to make sure the right communication's there. Certainly because there are many seniors that we see come through and qualify. And again, for all our developments, there is an opportunity for seniors, since we are meeting both in senior-specific buildings and in multifamily housing. We are both in the design of the building and the execution of the marketing and the lottery. We're trying to make sure that there are opportunities for seniors. On the NYCHA question that Councilmember Brewer brought up, so as part of a 2007 Hudson Yards area rezoning, there was a commitment to finish off the urban renewal large-scale plan for what is now known as Harborview, which is part of the Amsterdam Houses broader development. 150 units of affordable housing was to be built on phase 3. The affordable housing commitment is there. There is, I defer to NYCHA on questions about their development plan, and HPD is still ready and there, and we will work together to advance that project when the appropriate time comes.
I'm sorry, so NYCHA is the developer of the affordable housing?
The land is NYCHA land. It is part of the Harborview footprint. The proposal is to build a 100% affordable project on that development. 150 units of housing is the estimated total. So since it's NYCHA land, we would defer to NYCHA, but likely would, in the past, it's gone through an RFP to solicit a developer who would build and fulfill both that and the commitments collected from the community and from NYCHA.
All right, I'll follow up with you.
And I know you've run out of time, and I wish we could spend so much more time talking through some of these important issues, but I just want to say on the public bank issue, I would defer to the Department of Finance, and you probably should have extensive discussions with them.
Do you support the idea in principle?
I don't really understand. I would like to see what you're talking about. Yeah.
We do have another. It's basically a bank where we use our deposits at our. Where we determine where we use our deposit, as opposed to giving it to JP Morgan Chase, who tells us how to use our money and make money off of us. There is one in the country, and there are many variations of public banking institutions, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Now we will have Council Member Feliz.
Thank you. I want to start by thanking Speaker Adrian Adams and Chair Salamanca for two very important housing bills before this committee today. When we're talking about housing, we're talking about obviously an affordable housing crisis, but when we're talking about housing in the city of New York, we're also talking about one of the most racially and economically segregated housing markets in the entire country. And to touch on one point that was mentioned earlier about high and low opportunity neighborhoods, here in this city, and unfortunately many other cities, you can tell the level of opportunity one will have based on the neighborhood that you live in. You can tell the type of schools you'll have access to, the type of jobs you'll have access to, the air that you'll be breathing, all based on the neighborhood that you live in. We have a housing crisis, and it seems like we're only building affordable housing in the poorest communities in the city of New York. And this is not theory, or this is not an argument. You could actually tell based on this map that we all have in front of us. So I think we need to take steps to make sure that every single community is building, not only the low-income communities. So I have a few questions on that topic. Are there any proactive steps that HPD takes to ensure that affordable housing is built in areas that haven't been building affordable housing? And I know earlier you mentioned giving some projects some priorities, so can you elaborate on that and any other steps that you take?
Let me just say, your remarks, amen.
Yes.
We're on the same page. And that's why, the conversation about the city of yes, creating a city of housing opportunity across the entire landscape is important, and we're excited about it. And the folks at this desk work every day to extend the reach of affordability and fair housing opportunity and choice in every neighborhood of the city, and we can speak to that.
Yeah, maybe I can talk about some of the things that so just as the commissioner said, yes, 100% agree. And I think one of the things that is most important for all of us is that we all have to take deliberate action, right, to actually change the status quo. If we don't actually take deliberate action, the same things will continue to happen. So some of the things that we've done, we talked a few minutes ago about homeownership. We changed the amount of assistance available for first-time home buyers from $40,000 to $100,000. in order to allow New Yorkers to buy in more parts of the city. We know that average home price is over $700,000, depending on where you are. And so without the additional assistance, it would really limit options. So that is one deliberate decision. In the new construction world, as I mentioned off and on in the last couple hours, we use low-income housing tax credits to basically finance every single new construction project that we build, the ones that are subsidized by the city, not the as of right. Those subsidized projects, because we use tax credits, we have scoring criteria. And one of the things that we have changed is in the scoring criteria, we now have a bucket specifically for limited affordability areas. So we're taking all of these little steps in a bunch of places that add up. And RFPs, we've specifically looked at what we don't actually have a lot of public sites left, but we certainly have looked pretty hard at those public sites to try to figure out where we have not been able to provide as much affordable housing, and we are advancing those projects as soon as we possibly can. So it's these little decisions in all of the different pieces of our work that we hope add up to a bigger picture, but we really do need and I know we talked about the partnership, but it's everything from, council and land use actions to the state legislature and the tools that we have the authority to use and that allow us to work in different types of communities, is City of Yes and the zoning text amendment that builds up to actually provide a framework that will allow us to actually be able to provide housing choice in different communities of New York City. So those are some discrete actions, but we could talk more. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say that you asked for examples. So just when we were able to actually reconstitute the pre-development team and get back on the ground with RFPs, the areas that we started off with was Jersey Street and Staten Island, where we need more affordable housing, 388 Hudson in the west side of Manhattan, where it's low affordability and we need more housing, 280 Bergen in downtown Brooklyn, where we need more housing, it's low affordability, and building on the work of the Gowanus rezoning. So we are certainly putting our resources and time into the areas that you suggested we need to put resources and time.
Yeah, and just curious, how effective have those steps been in terms of bringing affordable housing to those areas that haven't been building?
I would just, for a minute, just say that, we just started tracking our affordable housing production in limited affordability areas. It's actually a new metric that we added to the mayor's management report, so you can see how we're doing over time. We have been at about 10%. There was a slight uptick this year. And so right now, that's where we are. And so we're going to continue to track progress. We aren't just considered with limited affordability areas. There's certainly other housing investments and community investments that we think are important. We talked about anti-displacement. We talked about preservation work. So that's certainly not our only focus, but because that investing in those areas does take really deliberate, concrete action, that is one metric that we are trying to track more transparently.
Okay, and final question. Based on the system that we currently have, including those changes that you just mentioned that were recently made, how much progress can we expect to make, let's say, in the next 5-10 years? Can we expect progress, and do you think that's sufficient progress on the issue of racial and economic inclusion in housing?
Thank you for that question. We think it depends on a lot of factors. The commissioner referred to HPD Slice as a small part of all of this, and it's an important piece, but I've mentioned it, but I'm going to mention it again. We need partnership from the council to help us overcome some of the barriers that we have historically experienced in building in some of these areas. That's why some of these areas are limited affordability areas. Sometimes it's because they are very expensive and it takes more resources, and sometimes it's not, and it's just been hard for us to build. And so in addition to thinking about targets and overcoming these and building more, we need to overcome some of the obstacles that are preventing us from building there in the first place. A major step is the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. We want to work collectively to pass and move those zoning text amendments forward. That's one way that we'll be able to do more in areas where we haven't been able to do it so far. And we think that with those steps and working together, and the Speaker's bill is something we look forward to working with all of you on, then we can move forward against these challenges.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Feliz. I'm just gonna wrap up by saying thank you for being here today on this, hopefully we can continue to work. I know that there's a little pushback on Intro 362 regarding that reporting bill, but I'm confident that we can get to a good place and we can get this to the finish line. I want to thank you all for coming and testifying in front of the council. We're going to take a 10-minute recess, and then we're going to open up with public testimony.
Thank you, Chairman.